48. 40 of the 8.
Yes, it is. It is one of the better even numbers,
Uh-huh.
being the 6 and the 8 that turns to 4 and 8.
Uh-huh.
It is a
Yeah.
12. It is a 3. I don't know. Um,
Uh-huh. And so here we are in June already. Gosh. Time
yes.
the enemy on both sides again.
Yes, absolutely. I this is a I'm intrigued by the confluences of things. So like a couple months ago we did Expedite on Holy Saturday,
Mm,
and in addition to a very probably one of the most syncretically geared saints, right? And
mm.
Anthony is so syncretized. But so there's already that confluence when we do anything Anthony. But on top of that, it is also Friday the 13th, which has its own lore.
Yeah.
Um, and then, at least for me, because of Heliocal Rising, it is the Heliocal Rising of the Pleiades, where I am.
Yeah.
So there's my dog has four legs but walks only one way. Brain can't help but wonder how they're all connected. So, following the bouncing ball of the karaoke that is unscripted of this show, um, here's to little threads of connection of mad connection that
hmm
sometimes should not be happening, stitching a mouth together like a little shrunken head. Um,
No.
uh,
Yeah. I like
so
that.
I'm not sure what that means in the end, but I like the visual.
Let's yeah, let's do Chekhov's Shrunken Head, and we'll see by the end, by Act 3, what it speaks. I like
Yes.
that very much. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Radio Free Golgotha, episode 48, June 2025, as far as I'm aware. We are here to celebrate the feast of Anthony of Padua, sometimes Anthony of Lisbon. And we have a host, as usual, of other topics, other touchstones, touch plants, touch beasts, touch day signs, touch tarots, touch figures, and touch dead magicians. That's also an instruction.
I like
To
the idea of Touchstone and Hearthstone in the sense of as we wander through the extrapolatory, lake rock skippings of
Mhm.
how our conversations go, that it's like the thing you touch, so that when you die you reincarnate there in a game that you
Yeah,
spawn in a
save
game.
points. Right,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the Hearthstone, the safe stone, whatever touchstone. I like this idea. If nothing else, just go back on your breathing to shamatha meditation type of thing of like um, listening to experience very lovely experienced lamas be asked questions like, so when I was meditating, I saw a vision of Tara or of Curricula or whatever that was telling me to do all these things, and they always say, that's really lovely. Go back to your breathing. It's all very important. Go back to your breathing.
It's all very important.
It's all information.
Uh-huh.
Focus on your breathing. Um,
Focus.
Focus. That's a
I keep
um,
coming back to that thing about you get better at what you practice, so be aware of what you are practicing.
yes, absolutely. Including what complaining.
hmm hmm
Procrastination is its own reward.
Yeah.
um, but really, thanks, meme culture, for blowing up procrastination as something that is usually not actually about putting things off, um,
Mm.
and more about avoidance of something else than the task at hand. So, that said, the task at hand, the touchstone, first, as you said, Anthony of Padua, June 13th, 2025. Happy feast day to all those that don't celebrate, because you deserve a good feast day more than most. Um, but we are exploring syncretisms today and the extrapolations of how these things go. Some of these things are specifically chosen to build upon the themes, and some of them are just happy happenstance, as always. The recipe is guided but never mandated. So our saint of the day, Saint Anthony of Padua, Saint Anthony of Lisbon, as Dr. Al said, are our demon, and this is where we might even catch hands from ourselves, perhaps. Um, Eshu, and with perhaps a nod towards the Quimbanda Eshu, but we can't talk about the Quimbanda Eshu without talking about the Yoruba Eshu, and by extension, the Angola, Aluvaya, Pombogira, all of these things going in here. But Eshu as demon is perhaps the starting point, especially in wake of the Eshu is not the devil campaign that is really, really needed and really important in the larger Orisha sphere as well.
Mm.
But our herb of the day is the beautiful lady Belladonna.
Mm-hmm.
Our style of magic were, am, idols, Billy and otherwise. Our stone of the day, diverting from the lapidaries perhaps just slightly, but will make sense as to why we're putting the theme in there of the Yangi stone, or laterite, as it's called in English. A stone intrinsically tied to Eshu, as we'll see. Our day sign is Tochtli, which is rabbit, the bunny. And our animal, our beast of the bestiary, is the rooster, the cock.
Mm-hmm.
The geometric figure of the day is Fortuna Minor, and its corresponding homographic, Irosun Meji of Ifa and Dilogun. The tarot card is the Two of Cups, and our historical magician is Jubiaba, who is well known in the literary sphere and especially the Brazilian literary sphere, but is a really interesting figure. So I'm excited to round it out at the end for Jubiaba.
Yeah, I'm excited for a lot. Like some of these Belladonna is. I don't think anyone's going to argue it's not a plant. But very excited for some of these ones where we get to poke at the limits of our descriptions and definitions of what even is demon, what even is dead magician, etc. In a continued way. And a very Brazilian feel as well, which is always lovely to be exploring for sure.
So I will cede over the saint a little bit, if you're willing to start us off with him.
Sure.
I again preface this, because I'm sure we're going to get into it as well after we talk about his life and the cult proper, the right-handed Anthony. But this is a saint that is seen in all of Catholicism just as such a prominent saint, like one of the more well-known and loved saints, regardless of any specific relationship with him. It's just like everybody has some relationship to Saint Anthony, even if it's just, oh, my grandma had a statue of him. People recognize him, and he's so ubiquitous in that way. And I think because he died young, and because his iconography is just so paternal in that holding the baby Jesus, I find it quite interesting how universal a saint he is. There are a few saints that are that, for such a modern saint by extension. It's a lot like Francis of Assisi, and you usually see it in the older kind of pre-congregation saints like Barbara or Michael, and these big figures that have always been there. It's fascinating to see how loved Anthony of Padua is, to the point of any saint that has like nursery rhyme sayings around them, I'm here for. So yeah.
Saint Anthony of Padua, as we said, aka Antonio de Lisboa, right? Lisboa. Not the 3rd to 4th century Common Era's Anthony the Great, aka Anthony of Egypt, Anthony the Abbot, Anthony of the Desert, Anthony the Anchorite, Anthony the Hermit, Anthony of Thebes.
We do have a lovely episode on.
Right. The father of all monks who was tempted in the desert, but kind of named after him, right?
Yeah.
And again, so we're already into. I don't think there's as much hagiographic blur because Padua Anthony is so big as well. But our Anthony today is the Portuguese Franciscan Catholic priest who was born in Lisbon on the 15th of August, 1195, and died at the Poor Clare Monastery at Arcella, which is now part of Padua, on the 13th of June, 1231. Often said to be one of the, if not the most popularly celebrated followers of Francis of Assisi, right? Being part of the order thereof, the Franciscans. Certainly his popularity is definitely assisted by Portuguese imperial evangelization, right? By the count I found on one site, a patron saint of at least 105 cities through Brazil, across like 10 different states, and being one of the most venerated saints in that country, which is not short of saint veneration. I am struck by that we actually do have a fair amount about his life, about what he got up to, even for this end of 12th into the 13th century saint. There's a fair amount that's documented, right? From various places that he goes when he's a kid, to joining the Franciscans, to his preaching and teaching that he becomes incredibly well known for, to some of his to some proper miracles, but like a lot of miracles that are like, I don't want to say small, but like kind of beautifully everyday in some cases. I mean, there's some like incredible stuff as well. His teaching posts at universities, like that at Montpellier and Toulouse in the south of France. Some more accounts of his miracles across like Italy, like northern and a lot of veneration in the south. To his retreat as he's like getting sick and eventually dying, to his canonization, to his wider kind of veneration and things. Were there any particular things that struck you about his like early life that feel like important before we get into some of the miracles that I thought were cool to mention?
No, having gone to a Franciscan high school, like I have a soft spot for Franciscan saints. They at least in feel come across as being gentle and nature loving is a stereotype, right? So there's definitely a call to prayer and contemplation that is more than just the discipline that was put out there by the Dominicans, or the reliance on like labor and work that is the Benedictine way. So anything being Franciscan, of just there's a difference there. Like, yeah, I enjoy his zeal, and I mean, he wasn't. We talked about early life. He died at 35, so it's all in early life. When for those of us that are well past that age now, but yeah, I think go. Please feel free to go to the miracles. He's a lovely feeling saint. I think he's one of those saints that, again, there's so much folklore about that I don't even know if people are aware of the majority of his life so much as that he wanted to see the baby Jesus, and that's what people know. Yeah. And otherwise, because you torture him by taking the baby Jesus away. So
right. And it's interesting looking at the iconography of that. We can definitely get into. So yeah, being a Franciscan and a follower of Francis and brother to the animal folk, there are a good couple of animal associated miracles. The preaching to the fish is celebrated in a lot of art, where he goes to Rimini in the north of Italy and encounters heretics, and he's like, okay, I'll go preach to the fish instead, and all these fish come and listen to his eloquence and love of God. And this encourages people to be like, oh, I guess this guy's worth listening to, if even the fish are listening to him. And that I like this. He doesn't destroy heretics. He persuades them via appeal to nature in some sense. We get that in the Miracle of the Mule as well, where he's asked to prove the Christological power of the Eucharist. And so this unbeliever turns up with a starving mule and a bunch of food, and is like, I bet you can't dissuade this mule from just going to eat, because that's what, that's what animals do. And so he shows them a sacrament loaded monstrance, and the mule is said to have bowed to the monstrance and the blessed sacrament, rather than heading straight for the bunch of food. And this is said to have happened variously at Rimini as well, where there's the chapel, the Tempio of Sant'Antonio, which still stands there today, apparently. It's also sometimes said to have happened at Toulouse, and I'm going to say this like the author Bourget. So again, an example of like like the story is the same, but so popular is it that many people are like, no, it happened down the road from me, which is always a good sign. There's another couple. There's another couple that also kind of demonstrate a certain degree of like, this kind of I guess we could say this gentleness, right? The miracle where he sits down to eat with a bunch of unbelievers who decide they're going to poison him because they don't want to hear what he has to say, and he realizes they're going to poison him and challenges them about, or they challenge him about it and say, well, okay, yeah, we are going to poison you, and tests of God, right? Tests of the faithful. If your God's so great, you should be able to eat this poison and be fine. And so he does and survives. And this tale is often used to prove or to elaborate on the line from the Gospel of Mark, from chapter 16, that the apostles of Christ, if they drink any deadly thing, it will not harm them. And so again, this idea of like, I'm not gonna persuade you through force or destroying you or having God like smite you. I'm going to do it by continuing to do good things and to not be a victim of nature, but kind of find this harmonious way with it. That said, there is I wasn't aware before looking into this of the miracle of the usurer, which is a little bit more like, again, he doesn't cause the guy to die, I don't think. So there's a tale that there's a businessman who is doing disreputable and immoral money lending, and that he gets condemned by St. Anthony. And during the funeral of this guy, it is the saint says that this man no longer has a heart, and when they open the body up of this corpse of the usurer, his heart is indeed missing, and it's supposedly found in his money trunk. So this is like some pretty literal kind of stuff, and I enjoy the move from like figurative to literal here in this kind of strange miracle of like a miracle, not where something good happens, but where something is shown like a kind of it's more omenistic, right? It's more shown that like this is, he speaks truly, like this guy was worth condemning. His heart was not where it should have been, which I rather like. The other one of the other big miracles is kind of associated with when he retires, as it were, to the Campos San Piero. He gets sick with ergotism in the year of his Lord 1231, and
it's so shady. Wow. Oh,
common era.
yeah.
And I like this because there's a little bit of tree lore in this. He's said to have lived in a room in this woodland retreat, possibly with two other friars. But the room is built under the branches of a walnut tree, and
Stay
it's
away.
here. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The angry umbrella that is the only I will grow here of walnuts. It's here that he is seen admiring the tree, and the Count Tiso, who has invited Anthony to the hermitage, has built him this house. And one night, the Count sees this powerful light coming from Anthony's house, under or in the tree, and he goes in and he sees St. Anthony embracing the baby Jesus. So there are also a couple of low-key miracles that are said to have marked his death. All the church bells start ringing by themselves, which is also a thing that church peals do indicate a death, or can indicate a death, different numbers in different areas of Europe for different kinds of people and sometimes even kinds of death. The children are spontaneously crying in the street. And there's also the somewhat popular account about his incorruptible tongue in death. That again, as this potent preacher, as this guy that can charm the fishes and the beasts of the field and the fowl of the air, that his various parts of his speaking apparatus, his tongue and his jaw, and I think his vocal cords,
His vocal cords, yeah.
yeah, are taken and displayed in a reliquary for veneration. And when his body is exhumed 30 years after his death, he's not completely incorruptible. A lot of him has either decayed or has just turned to dust.
As indeed corrupted.
Right. But his tongue, quote, was observed to have glistened and looked as if it was still part of a live body, which is taken as a further observation that of his gift of preaching, that his tongue was so good it stuck around and was still as if it were alive. And there are a bunch of practices I'm most familiar with, like Italian and Italian-American practices of like silver tongues being hung or offered as milagro or votives or things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And again, yeah,
it's attributed to Saint Francis. I don't know if it's just popularly attributed. There's a lot of things attributed to Saint Francis. One of which is preach the gospel at all times, when necessary, use words. And the power of the evangelical, let's say, lifestyle as opposed to the modern evangelical church. But this is what attracted him to the Franciscans to begin with, right? This is his love of simple and do the work. When he dedicates himself to that community that's at the Church of Saint Anthony the Great, like, right, that's his Fernando decides to become Antonio. Silver tongues, as well as just anything lost objects, right, as well as dangling him upside down, is just such common folk practice across the Mediterranean. It's poor guy is upside down a lot. Anyway, sorry, go on.
No. Yeah, I mean I love that the original missing object is a book, is a psalter, is a book of Psalms. He realizes it's gone missing, and he prays for it to be either found or returned. And not only
stolen.
Yeah. Not only is the thief moved to return it, but comes back to the order as well. Which is wonderful. And so this leads to an incredibly popular practice of Anthony being your guy to go to if you've lost something.
Which, as a Protestant era raised person, I would not call you such by blood. You are probably mixed like me. But Tony come around. Did you? Mm-hmm. Yeah, find what's lost and make it found.
Yeah,
or some version of that is pretty common in English to find it. I'm also the history of books, right, to be brought in there is like, why just the Psalter? Because it's handwritten. This is pre-printing press, and therefore he would not be able to afford another one or be given permission to spend money on one.
Right. The vows of poverty. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of
and
there's
the book
also a cook.
Yeah.
So when they say put in charge of hospitality, that's what they mean. He was a cook, and he didn't want to be. He wanted to be doing other things, but they put him in the cook. When you're young in an order, they don't really give you what you want at first. They're like, hey, let's squish this ambition right now. So he was a cook, which is because of that, his shrines are often in the kitchen.
Oh.
Because also I believe that if anybody's losing things on a regular basis, it's whoever's in the kitchen trying to find the specific spoon or pot or seasoning. Or the mother who just wants their daughter to find their way again and find a husband.
Yeah. And the finding of lost things is such a huge piece of folk magic in general. To continue to sing the praises of Dr. Tabitha Stanmore, her recent book on cunning folk and service magic really does a good job of framing. She has this specific example of a woman who loses, I think, some spoons, and goes to has records of going to a variety of cunning folk who are each like, oh no, I deal with I have a specialty. You should go and see the guy down the road about it. But she also just frames that like, it's easy for us at moderns to be like, all of this trouble over some spoons, but like, that could be like more than you could afford to replace as a subsistence like peasant, and how significant that is to work out like who stole your linens or where the cow has wandered off to, or yeah, or where your soul took is, especially as kind of a badge of office as well. And the book also becomes important in terms of like, I was noting that someone was saying the iconography of Anthony becomes a little tricky because Franciscans all dress the same. That's kind of the point, right?
Yeah.
It's a uniform. It's itself part of their office and their vows. And so how do you tell them apart from Francis and from others? And so there's the lily he has, but also there's his book where he's studying, and it also has the vision of the Christ child, right? That he's wanted to see so much. And so his images and his statuary start to have him with a book, with an open book, with baby Jesus on the book. Sometimes that leads to just him holding. I'm looking at a little statue of him right now, which is literally just him holding the infant Christ.
Yep.
And as you say, it leads to the practice of some statues having a removable baby J that you can take away from him when you feel that the world has taken away your divine way. And if if things don't feel holy to me right now, they don't get to feel holy to you, statue of Saint Anthony, either, until things are returned, and we can both see the power and blessings of Christ again. But like you said, being suspended upside down as well.
Yes. I mean, suspending upside down is a pretty common practice in folk Catholicism. I think what's fascinating, and I can't remember, there's a couple movies that show this practice, at least in Mexican American houses, which you get a different St. Anthony statue for each daughter you want married, and ostensibly a son, but they worry about the daughters. And so, 3 St. Anthony's upside down in your kitchen is because you have 3 daughters.
Yeah, yeah. I was reading that connection specifically to being a marriage saint.
Yes. Well, there's also specifically the jealous husband story, right? The woman that was killed by her husband, that's attributed. There's a whole thing around that. But that it raises a few things in practice, which is interesting, which we can get to, or just, flash forward to idolatry and what the accusations of those things are. But that a statue can, like, the saint can work one thing, holy, and like holy with like as not part, not holy as,
with a W, yeah,
with a W, holy. That sounds really weird. In whole, also sounds weird. But that if you have them doing one thing, that the next option is just get another statue, and the grace of the saint will fill that one as much as it can and work for you, because obviously the saint has to work on behalf of hundreds of people. So I really love folk justifications as to why these things are done in this way. Ostensibly one saint statue, which is not the saint, should be able to perform multiple miracles, but apparently not simultaneously.
Makes sense in terms of managing your workspace, right?
Certainly. Who doesn't love a good plastic Botanica saint with a magnet on the bottom, or a sticker option when you get it?
Heck yeah.
So that you can affix it to your car, or sideways on your fridge, or upside down on a metal shelf. So there's lots of options.
Yeah. Stuff around what's done with the statue and things like that. I know anecdotally, I know at least one of our dear friends' Italian grandfather would put all of his lottery tickets and racing bet slips under his Antonio statue.
Yeah.
And apparently did pretty well at the tracks as a result. So there's partly that thing of like, who do you go to? Your guy, right? And for a lot of people, Tony is their guy. And so there's some stuff there around like good accidents happening to me, not bad accidents, I guess. But also like, it's not just because he is the patron saint of gambling. But especially if you are also, trying to make money to look after your family and be a good husband.
Well, certainly the idea of not losing money is where that goes. So it's almost a prophylactic of, do not make me come to you for the money I lost on this ticket.
Right, lost things. Yeah.
So there's something there, because at least it's interesting where, as far as like folk use, you also get San Cayetano. I don't know what that is in English. Cayetan, however, Cayetan probably in English. Cayetano in Spanish is also one of the ones that's like, you see the the horse betting slips and gambling stuff associated with in the Southwest, and sometimes confused for that. I have seen people call Saint Anthony Cayetano or Cayetano Anthony, even though they are not the same order.
Hmm.
But he was associated with Padua, so I guess there's something there.
Yeah.
He studied law there, so who knows?
The law connection's interesting in terms of like the stuff around like not just his blessed tongue, but yeah, related in parts to like harmonious marriage and also to showing people who are cheating you or cheating on you or lying to you, not just in romance but like business as well. And I've heard some people say like it's especially important not to lie to Anthony, that you have to have a good tongue when you speak with him.
Yeah.
Which I guess, you know, is good practice for saint stuff anyway, but apparently that's something he's especially big on. Which yeah, that makes sense.
Well, especially if a saint is carrying the baby Jesus in his arms at all times, because baby Jesus is going to tell him he's lying.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Lies made baby Jesus cry. Yeah.
Yeah.
Often gets depicted in you know paintings and stuff as miraculously saving individuals in various accidents as well, in like votive offerings and retablo and things like that. He's like pulling people out of the way of stuff, which is also pretty rad.
I like the sometimes in depictions of the blessing of the animals, which they do on Francis of Assisi's feast day, that they specifically depict a mule coming in and kneeling with Saint Anthony by him, with the Christ child often on the donkey, in reference to the miracle of the ass.
Yeah.
Another donkey we could have talked about on the feast of the ass.
Hyperlink that back. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I think Anthony is interesting. Oh, so you like Saint heraldry, right? You have lilies, you have the book, you have the baby Jesus, you have the baby Jesus being tinier than the book, and then sometimes baby Jesus sitting on the book, and then sometimes baby Jesus just by himself. Always Saint Anthony has a tonsure, which is the delineating mark of Franciscans, right? They used to have to shave their heads, which is a mark of celibacy, and just the friar tuck of it all. There's also that association of Franciscans with being simpler, and the association we see within popular retellings of like Robin Hood of Friar Tuck being Franciscan and being a drunkard also applies to Anthony being a drunkard. At least Mahler implies such in one of the pieces of music that bears the name. There's Naben Wunderhorn, because I am not going to speak German well, I apologize. But there's a piece that is specifically about St. Anthony's sermon to the fish, and it implies, because of the tone, the rumor is that he's saying that he was drunk when he preached to the fish. In addition to many things, I think because of Anthony's kind of relationship to the door, what is it about that? Because there's so much of Anthony, the kitchen door, right, of being a place where you go in and out and being a kitchen saint, a finder of lost things, and therefore a protector, so that nobody would make you have lost things as well, meaning against thieves, or loss of money. So there's a ton of syncretisms that develop because of this, with deities of the threshold, deities of the door, deities of protection, deities of the outside, spirits of the outside. In addition to like a notable whole subset of Catholicism that developed, because I can't mention Anthony without talking about Quimbavita.
Yeah, Antonianismo.
Yeah.
Right.
So, whether it's various permutations on pronunciation, but Dona Beatriz Quimbavita was late 17th century, early 18th century prophet and leader of her own movement, which was Antonianism. You can see remnants of Antonianism at large museums, like the Met. There's definitely figures of Anthony that are Congolese. And Anthony is the Congo saint. Like before the Mafa, before the slave trade happened, the Portuguese come in, and I believe it's specifically Jesuits that are trying to get things going in Angola, and the tenets of Antonianism is that Saint Anthony is basically equivalent to Jesus in God's eyes. That Anthony is the real figure that must be followed. And there's a prayer called the Salve Antoniana, which she adapted from the Salve Regina, the Hail Holy Queen. So God is only concerned with believers' intentions, not with sacraments or good works. And so Saint Anthony was, in fact, like a second God.
Mm.
And she believed that the expression of Antonianism within Africa, within Angola, was actually the correct form, that Congolese Catholicism was the correct form, and that the practices of the white and Catholics were elitist and incorrect. That she combined native myths, including that of the fig tree, of the Mulemba, that her people were originally made from the skin of the fig tree. And so people often wore clothes made from the bark of the fig tree.
Mm.
And in this case, there's a relationship. Fig is a broad category. And more than likely, this is still reference to Mulemba, which is like a close relative of the banyan tree. So this kind of strangler fig, or gamaleta, it would be called in Brazil, or the banyan fig. These trees that when you put a branch in the ground, even when broken, it will turn into an entire other tree, or a tree that when birds shit the seed out, that if it lands on another tree, it will grow in the branches and then slowly overtake the whole trunk and strangle the other tree out of existence. So these long drooping root branches that go into the ground and kind of come back up are tied to this. Mm-hmm. She was white is the color of death, black is the color of humanity. And in fact, Jesus, Mary, and St. Francis were all actually Congolese, and were African. So this time period was a huge shift politically because it was intense civil war and the slave trade was going on. So she provided a national identity and revamped all of Catholicism to a way that worked for her and her people. She weekly held a performance ritual where she reenacted her reincarnation of St. Anthony. She dies each Friday and gets resurrected each Saturday. She promoted chastity, although she got pregnant a few times. She was known to terminate a few of those pregnancies. There's a lot going on there. She's a fascinating figure. There's some amazing books out there. John Thornton, The Congolese St. Anthony, is pretty well known. That's, I think, 98. Bassy's The Black Hand of God is also really good resource there. So
yeah, she's framed as a prophetess. That's how some people
yes.
describe her, and they also talk about her being possessed by Saint Anthony of Padua.
Absolutely.
In these states, healing people and performing various other miracles.
Yes.
And that this is
she takes the roots of what would be later seen across the Atlantic in the ADRs. You can see it there in the early days, being possessed by Saint Anthony, speaking as Saint Anthony, conducting rituals as Saint Anthony, and gaining authority and prominence and power through a public following through possession-based Catholicism.
Yeah, and enough of a following and a political threat to eventually be actually burned at the stake by order of King Pedro IV, quote, of Congo. Remarkable figure.
There is this notion that Anthony, again, as the Congolese saint, associated with the Congo people before, and the Congo being the largest wave of people to be brought first in the transatlantic slave trade from Africa itself. Remember, it's important to note that the slave trade, originally, the Spanish only brought slaves that were born in Spain to the New World at first, which then the British started piracy to get those slaves,
right?
So they didn't have to go to Africa. And then it started a whole shift in let's just go directly from Africa. It's closer. And the Portuguese, not caring at all, and having Brazil on their map, of course, they had the shortest distance. So Brazil had an intense trade route with Africa and brought just a huge volume of slaves over. And there's a whole, we talked about it a little bit before, but there's that great expression, God is big, but the forest is bigger. Dios es grande, mas o mato es mayor. That is talking about when people escape into the forest, the Portuguese soldiers are like, I am not going after them. It is cheaper to go get new slaves than it is to risk my life to go into the jungle where things are trying to kill me. Animals, mosquitoes, everything is trying to kill you. So the Portuguese settled along the coast. They did not go interior of Brazil. So the interior of Brazil, the forest represented freedom, and there was a merging of the indigenous culture with the African, and this running away to these colundos and these recreated African societies merged with indigenous peoples and formed a resistance to and thriving societies in spite of the more like settled Orthodox Portuguese Catholic cities along the coast. And Rio, which was Rio de Janeiro, was the Angola Catholic. This is where the Kimbundu were brought. It is Angola Central, it's Congo Central, but still the survival of the Congolese. So much of Brazilian Portuguese is colored with Congo, with Kimbundu, and Anthony, being the Congo saint, has a long history of being a marker of African identity. And you see the notion again of the saint that guards the door in these pristine Catholic homes or small niches that are built towards the front of the property for Saint Anthony by the upper class white Catholics, is also accessible spiritually for those of Congolese descent, especially. So there's this notion and a conflation where syncretism starts happening across the board. And Brazil is huge, so it's wrong to suppose, it's easy to suppose, but wrong to suppose that the major metropolitan centers are talking to each other about their underground religious practices. So curiously, I think Americans, I think it's fairly safe to say that Americans have no idea of the size of the UK, for instance, and tend to think that although Birmingham and London are not next door to each other, they are not that far from each other as well. Yet the cultures are drastically different, right? Because these are cultures that have grown up in place without this need of constant travel between.
Right. America is where 100 years is a long time, and England is where 100 miles is a long way.
Yeah, exactly. And so it's this notion that Bahia, Rio and Sao Paulo get kind of paired together. Sao Paulo, I will get in trouble for this, but most of the Paulistas will say that Sao Paulo is not really Brazil. It's more like New York and LA threw up on each other. That's the Bourdain quote. That LA threw up on New York or New York threw up on LA. But Sao Paulo is very metropolitan. It is very large capital city, even though it's not the capital. And it feels not quite as Brazilian as, let's say, Rio and Bahia are always considered quintessential Brazil. And Rio, this hot box of hills and the kind of heat, if it's 90 degrees in Sao Paulo, it will be 105 or 110 in Rio. And it's just hot and humid, and it is the main port town. It is the epitome of escapism for the wealthy Europeans that dock there and then can go away again. Like Rio has everything. Lots of wealth, lots of crime, lots of poverty, lots of witchcraft, lots of Orthodox religion. Everything is in Rio. But in Rio specifically, and therefore by extension Sao Paulo, because of their proximity, St. Anthony gets viewed as a mask or a syncretism that evolves with Eshu. And this starts the kind of, there's folk practices of St. Anthony that we should talk about. We can always come back to them too if we think of them.
Yeah.
But I think that Eshu is an interesting problematizing, generative, let's say generative, as is befits his station, proposition as a demon, because I think it makes us go back to what the nature of a demon is. And we've talked about this a little bit. I think it was episode 40 last year, our kind of like, let's talk about what we talk about episode. I don't know why I'm talking like that now. Okay. But So
See?
Eshu,
I
see,
said, see?
yeah, Eshu. Eshu, first and foremost, is the name of a, and deity is already like, what is the nature of deity, right?
Mm,
It's one. There's a great YouTube video that says Olodumare is not God, and their entire premise of this is because oftentimes when you ask in Yoruba society like who a god is or what is God, they'll say Olodumare,
mm,
but the premise of the video is that if I told you God is Olodumare and your native perspective is that you are an English speaker who says God is what you believe, you're always making the shift. If I say that no, Olodumare is God, puts the emphasis on God being the objective truth and Olodumare being some native description of it that isn't quite the thing.
yeah.
But if you switch it around, it's kind of like when people talk about, up until recently, there used to be this idea that there was no national language in the United States. Although the majority of government business is conducted in English, you had the right to ask for your language at a DMV for anything, right? This idea that if you're going to have no national language, then that truly means no national language.
Yeah.
And similarly with that, I guess just saying that like if you're a national language, like, or if you want to propose a universal language, why can't everybody just learn to speak English? It's like, let's all learn Yoruba. Let's just start there. Like if it's the one that's hard for you to learn,
Right.
suddenly it's, oh, you know what? We should all just speak our own languages. So similarly here, it's hard to say deity when I'm talking about Orisha. It's hard to say deity when I'm talking about Inkisi or any number of things. That, you know, Neteru or Teot, Teteo, any of the various god forms that we have. And we've talked about the kind of Germanic inherited Brito-Germanic, Germano-British, kind of weird over-anthropomorphization of what were perhaps not as anthropomorphized in ancient times, pagan gods. And they all kind of get they get folked over, perhaps in their kind of trying to make them seem like a bunch of drunk telenovela characters,
Yeah.
in their devices, as opposed to, and this is speaks to the kind of greater thing that happens post-industrial revolution with the rise of the growing rise of the middle class and everything that happens of constantly distancing yourself from nature. And the practical side of this, you know, we talk, but you just recently were talking about folk practice of spellcraft and things like this, where people think of it as ceremonial, and you're like, this is folk magic. This is not, and this folk magic has existed for several thousand years in some form of this particular spell,
Yeah.
and gets recycled into a grimoire, and suddenly it's viewed as something different and holier and more consciousness raising by the Victorian era, inherited era of how magic is interpreted.
Yeah.
All that to say, we can talk about how in an orthodox Yoruba framework, as in like Isheshe or Odisha, that is practiced contiguously, but also through various lenses and different local variations within Nigeria and Benin, that Eshu is the selected head, Orisha, the deity of the crossroads, of the movement of all energy, of Ashe, like the ability to make things happen. Eshu is the first and the last. Eshu is the most and the least. Eshu is contradiction. Eshu is Lord of opportunity, Lord of agency, and nothing can be done without Eshu moving. The offerings, right, of palm oil, which is the main cooking oil, but is also, it's just things are slick and they move past. So you want something to come to you quickly or to move past you quickly, you offer palm oil. You want something to be attractive and sweet, you offer honey. And all this happens curiously on the, over the shrines, which are Yangi stones, which we'll talk about, the laterite stones, probably all in tandem with each other. But this deity memory gets syncretized with St. Anthony of Padua, in Rio specifically. Eshu can be other saints in other areas. But similarly, you see St. Anthony of Padua in Cuba being syncretized with Eshu there as well. It is not the only mask. There are many masks of Eshu, depending on specific manifestations. He can come in many forms. Something I think that is also not emphasized in the kind of Edith Hamilton reductive nature, although I adore Edith Hamilton. That book was, the mythology book was just such a good book to always have on you when you're like 7 or 8 years old and trying to figure out the wonders of the world. But that there is a notion there of there are different Thors, there are different Zeuses depending on the city you're in, or you don't have what they offer to Zeus 400 miles away. You have what you offer to Zeus where you are. Everything's not about these trade networks, although deities were traded happily, especially the Romans mastered that, the Egyptians too. This idea that there are different, in Spanish we'd say roads or caminos, and in Brazil they'll say qualidades, qualities of these deities. So there's an Eshu of the marketplace. There's an Eshu that guards the cemetery. There's an Eshu that guards the front door. There's an Eshu that is the primal Eshu from which all of these things come from. And Anthony still gets associated with this deity that is the start and the end of all things. Like the Antonianism survives curiously by repaganizing back into and then Christianizing and repaganizing. But in the great umbrella that is Macumba Carioca, like the Macumba being a general term of like African witchcraft, quote unquote. I'm scare quoting. I'm Peter Rabbiting my hands right now. Little bunny foo-foo. That the melting pot, to borrow Jake's kind of like the true Alexandria, right? Things are coming into Rio and moving around in this cauldron of all these cultures, by force, by necessity, by exposure, by trade, by choice, by rebellion, by advantage, by class struggle, by all these things are forming this witchcraft that is forming. And it's interesting because this term, Macumba or what Quimbanda, this Eshu that we're coming here, that evolves out of this is the Orisha is there, yes, but that belongs to the folk memory and to the Candomblé temples, which are, you basically have to run away and join as a means of this idea of a pure African religion, but it was incredibly Brazilianized. These women that founded these tejeros had a specific style, and they were trying to get things into order, and they were creating an ordered society that allowed the culture to survive by making it Brazilian. That is the true nature of it. It's not pure African. This idea of purity doesn't work. It's an African religion in Brazil, and therefore becomes Afro-Brazilian and keeps going from there. But Eshu, the offerings are made on the street corner outside the terreiro. And because of this, these offerings of cornmeal and meat and alcohol, if you're a poor person and you don't have much food, you know that over by that weird temple where they, all those people dress in white all the time, that you can go get alcohol and food and things. So the homeless, the unhoused, and all of the metaphors that go along that, as well as just people coming late night home drunk from a bar.
Right.
See this, that is a really nice looking steak on the top of that thing, and I'm hungry. So this association of the things, the people, the spirits, the people seen and unseen that walk the streets, that cross through the crossroads, which Eshu is the deity of, also get called Eshu. And there's this notion of the dead that is a very Congolese way of looking at things, as the world of the dead and the ocean of the dead that is churning, that we're all walking through, merges with these Yoruba conceptions of deity and metaphysic and divination. And the great, Macumba Carioca develops Eshu as something that is all of these things and more and none. And all syncretized with asking St. Anthony license to enter something, which what they're really talking about is Eshu, who is also the devil, or the devil's wife, or not. And there was a campaign that I mentioned that happened a few years ago. It's still ongoing, that Eshu is not the devil. There's several books by this title. Eshu no es Satan, Eshu, a diabo, these types of this. That Eshu is not a devil, Eshu is not Satan. Because what it's trying to go is, yes, Eshu is not the devil when that is being said, or when the enemies of free expression or choice, or the evangelicals are saying that Eshu is a demon. No, fuck you, he's not. That's not what's actually going on. But if you want to talk about demon in the sense of messenger, in which angel falls under that role, or anything that is a go-between, whether the Greek gods were called daimones, which they were, and spirits, or the dead, it's an office. It's not a race. It's not a hard, fast description. It is an office that is filled. What is acting as demon to you? What is acting as daemon to you? And because of this, Eshu fits demon beautifully. in the very, um, yeah, sorry.
In a socio-political sense, right?
Yes.
A devil who opposes the god of the dominating powers that be, of the colonialists that come over and say, that thing you do looks evil, right? A devil who rebels against the monopoly of the oppressor, whether that's, dominant economic elites, or maybe even as it gets taken into an individual sphere, the way we oppress ourselves, and a devil who pokes as much as tempts us to live life free from everything but the consequences of our actions.
Yes.
Right. This notion of a daimon, a daemon who will laugh with us in our victories and at us in our defeats, especially the defeats we bring on ourselves, especially by, lacking the self-mastery, not just of being self-disciplined, but of not being radically honest with ourselves, right? I'm maybe going on some tangents here, but absolutely agree this conception of okay, you're calling our thing a devil or the devil. Well, your take on piety looks like it's upholding some pretty awful things. So, okay, if that's what you want to call us, let's go. Let's seize the power that has as well.
Yeah, I mean, if there's ever a patron of extrapolation, it's Eshu. All the roads that are birthed from every road that's ever been, the network. And it shows the inseparability, right? With the internet is obviously both Eshu and Ogun in that way. Technology is there, but it's the webs that Eshu, the road opener. We say that Eshu is the road opener. He's not. He's the owner of the roads. He's the wanderer of the roads. He's the one that knows all the roads. You need that violence, that Ogun, that sword tip to cut the way. But all that to say, Eshu. By the time it comes into the 19th century and we see these documented forms of low spiritism where people are getting possessed by figures that they call father and mother, especially in Bishop Neri's account in Espiritu Santo, which is, I think, late 1800s, early 1900s, but there's accounts previous to this, of course. Umbanda did not just come into existence in the early 20th century solely at the hands of Celio Moraes. Umbanda is a Kardecian spiritist model of the spiritisms that were already going on, which was a spirit possession cult that we see evidence of in Antonianism. And here, people being possessed by ancestral figures and natural spirits, nature spirits, to the point of a proto Macumba is there. There is what we would recognize perhaps as Quimbanda and other paths are there. They're documented before the word Quimbanda shifts from being the priest to the tradition. And specifically with the whitening, the branqueamento of the 20s and 30s, where Brazil imports white Europeans and gives them lots of land in hopes that there will be some great, quote, grand miscegenation, and there will be one giant mixing of the races and end the over Africanization is really what they're going for. Is they want to bring everybody to a common middle class in effort. That happened in the religions too, and it has to be discussed. It has to be explored if you're looking into this, and especially if you don't know about it, to be aware of it. But even when you do know about it, to still be aware of it, of what is going on is this constant class clash of doing what is acceptable, of moving the African traditions away from their African technology and expressions, except when your situation is dire. So here is the parallels to witchcraft, and here is where this over-dependence upon the word witchcraft in English as being only indicative of certain 40s and 50s expressions of British neo-pagan revival witchcraft limits our discussion and the incorporation of other traditions that have been trying to understand their own place in the larger spiritual religious sphere, especially in the magical sphere, that first then have to buy into the Murrayist fallacy and to this idea that witchcraft has to look a certain way, whereas witchcraft is a description. It is not a codification. There are landmarks, sure, but there are more things in common between those things that are called witchcraft, and especially if we're going to go into, what is a demon, but what is pagan, what is witch, what are these things
Yeah.
that are happening, is such a complex discussion that cannot afford at this point, if there is to be any growth, discussion, or acknowledgement of a world outside of the Anglosphere, of which is being used primarily to pepper and season Anglophonic magic, as opposed to embraced as its own possible friend to talk to. And it's one of the reasons that I fight for the cross-tradition dialogue on this show. And by fight, I mean with myself. Primarily of like, oh, can we say these things? Because there's also the people that are going to take and run with it through that combination and make a chimera of something, and we're going to, make a chimera that is ends up being, a bloodborne crazy thing that is, our pet dog reanimated in a bad way.
Yeah. Well, this is again the frictions of Crossroads, and the frictions of Eshu, that there are these deep histories and contexts to practice, and there are ways of working with Eshu that are road tested, in the structures and in the familial sodalities of like of houses of godparent and these kinds of relationships of training and trust and support, the familia di diablo, right? But also anyone can approach Eshu, right? That he's already present. But when you approach, do you know what you're doing? And like, what does that mean in terms of building not only a personal access to agency to turn your life around, but also dealing with the consequences of that and understanding what you now walk with.
Yeah.
I guess there's a sense right there with, is Eshu a demon in the sense of a wicked spirit who is repelled by Christian piety? Which would be, no, I don't think so, right? I'm aware of Eshus of Quimbanda that are claimed to have lived human lives as priests.
Mm-hmm.
I'm aware of Eshus of Quimbanda who themselves claim a devotion to St. Anthony specifically, right?
Yep.
And so, in the sense of, does this have to be framed in terms of Christian goodies and baddies? No. Why not both?
Yeah, I think ultimately with Eshu, I think the explosive force of not only just the collision at the crossroads, but the expansion from each moment is something to be celebrated. I think because Eshu, at least in the deity side and the Orisha side, is said to be the count keeper, the lawyer, the one that tests us. And what are they testing is character. What are our consistencies as a person? Because character ends, Iwapele in the Orisha tradition, ends up being the thing that ultimately is rewarded, not out of a like, we see it in the myths, but it's not necessarily like, oh, you're a good boy, you're going to get what you need. It's that good character allows you to keep cool in situations that would otherwise lead you to make heated, hot decisions that might not serve you. Yeah. So good character draws better people around you. And it's funny that Eshu is the one that tests those things, because we also see Eshu being the one, and the Eshus of Quimbanda being, whores, murderers, thieves, the vagabonds, the povo, the people that are rejected by society and in turn reject it. That there's this intricate connection to the demimonde that is always there with Eshu, and at the same time, there's this need, even in the most holy of times with Eshu, to understand that life is to be enjoyed, that life is meant to be lived, and there's a balance there. That Eshu is tipped too much towards restriction is no longer Eshu. Eshu tipped towards too much agency is no longer sustainable.
Yeah.
And so there is this thing where Eshu is both in the middle of the gods of the right and the gods of the left. These forces that fight for life and the forces that are trying to fight against life. And the interplay there are some groups that will say that Eshu of Quimbanda, or the Eshus and Pombagiras that are known usually in Quimbanda, are indeed the slaves of the Orisha and are Eshu of the same. They're like Orisha. There are others that will distinctly separate those. Are Quimbanda Angola definitely separates those of there's Cachisu, there's these spirits, the Encantados, these spirits that are more ancestral than they are deific. Although we can, what are our dead if not minor gods? So the classifications are kind of, I can't hear you over practice. I can't hear you over the incorporation of every single thing that will give you advantage, whether it's from a European grimoire or an apostila from Candomblé or somebody's technology if they watch someone do an offering on the street corner and they go, I'm going to redo that and I'm going to do it with my spirits. It speaks to what you were talking about of the substitution of certain things across the board and the recycling of folk magic that we were talking about earlier. That Eshu is not the same across all traditions or from priest to priest or moment to moment, and yet still is Eshu. Yeah.
A crossroads of crossroads.
A crossroads of crossroads, plans within plans, Anthonized. I'm not sure. So fire, primal, the friction of the crossroads, agency, choice, the devil of the crossroads. There are so many things that we see common within American folk practice, both from like the more African derived and hoodoo and conjure practices, but also the man at the crossroads that we see within European folklore as well. That the importance of the devil that brings you to the Sabbath, and this is another form of Eshu. Eshu is wonderfully exactly what we don't want the colonizers to be, in the sense that Eshu does not consider himself in any permutation separate from any other tradition. It's just like, I'm there too. That's just me in another form.
Right. You guys eating?
Yeah. Exactly. You can eat that. And that notion too, that on a large scale, there's that story in Ifa, I wish I could remember the Odu, that in order for God, Olodumare, to exist, that 3 other entities must be with them from the start, or it doesn't work. And you can tell the revision here, because the controversial thing I've said before, but I haven't gotten death threats yet. There's always tomorrow. Of Ifa is a later development within Yoruba cosmology, and is not necessarily the same. Not all gods are the same age, right? The +1 in the 400 Orisha is that new ones can be born, and other ones pass into non-existence anymore because they're no longer of use, or they get absorbed into other cults. But specifically here, that Olodumare forgot, which is intrinsically tied to Ashe, the power to make things happen, that in order for God to think anything or have an idea, Obatala must be there. And for God to reflect upon those thoughts, Ifa or Ella, wisdom, must be there. And in order for God to act on any of those thoughts, Eshu must be there. So that these deities are characteristically the same, or necessarily the same age, in order for God to be what we know of as God. And so Eshu has a history there of the thing that makes things happen. Action, incarnate. And appeased not only because a jealous god that we baby, or spirits that can do it, but the idea that, like in Quimbanda, that Eshu is a demon that is ancestralized, a demon that is brought in as an ancestor if it's not already an ancestor, a spirit that is embraced and becomes like a familiar spirit in the truest sense, not in the 90s sense of my cat is my familiar, but a spirit that teaches and that brings you increased agency through your alliance and incorporation of them into your personal too many languages in my head, court. So I think on that note, just trying to round out that, because that is to flip forward to the laterite stone and its importance, just so that I can bookend it, unless there's something you want to interject. And I've talked a lot, I'm sorry.
No. No, always a good thing.
Um,
Yeah, let's talk laterite. Yankee.
Yangi, the Yoruba word, laterite becomes the as a stone is incredibly annoying because sometimes it's really good, but if you drop it, it's gonna crumble. It's definitely a sedimentary experiment in what is solid and what is good yangi for a shrine and what is not. But this red hardened like clay sandstone thing going on, right? It's not an incredibly durable rock, but it's high in iron, and so it's very very red. It is a lovely little lump of clayish thing that is so associated with Eshu that I've heard story that if you pour palm oil on a piece of yangi, that Eshu is there receiving offerings, whether it's consecrated or not. Um, how's that for telling people something to do? But it's hard when dry, and it can be like an adobe, like used like a brick, and crushed down for certain minerals. But this reliance on it as a primal stone upon which to make offerings is, I think, the thing that interests me here, because of its association with Eshu that we see in like the Cuban form, or even the Brazilian, of this head with eyes made of cowries and things like that. This is definitely there's a definite Fombe influence in there, and Legba, the very very primal Eshu stone that is Yangi. That Eshu arises out of this. You see this. Yes, this is the Yoruba expression, but the Congolese too. This idea of mavango, which is made of clay. That this mound of earth that is able to receive offerings on behalf of that which moves all things. This stone that is able to become the omphalos, the center of the world for the moment when you're praying over it. And therefore you become the center of the crossroads. You're honoring the center of the crossroads when you honor and pour offerings over this rock, which common offerings, of course, are going to be palm oil, honey, liquor, cola nut, various fruits, and blood. That there's a balance of the various primal forces here that have to happen, but that the seasonings of everyday cooking are offered as well. There's a myth of various myths across different expressions of Orisha, whether it's Brazil, Cuba, Trinidad, folk expressions found elsewhere, and definitely Nigeria and Benin, of Eshu specifically saying, like, you call me and I will always be there in that rock. As well as the kind of evolution of that in Cuba, where they couldn't find Yangis, so they used the Yangi of Olokun, Anyaki Olokun, the brain coral becomes another substitute. The different types of coral rocks that could be there. So evolution, and it has to come you have to do something. You gotta keep working. Eshu exists in all things, so it makes no sense to say we can't worship Eshu because we don't have a rock.
Yeah.
We'll just get a new rock.
This is diaspora in action, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's necessity is the mother of invention, right? It's what is the next best thing, and if enough people agree on it and it takes off, then obviously the value center has been met. Obstacle is no longer obstacle, and that syncretism, which is in its own form of syncretism, becomes the new standard, and people forget that Yangi exists in Cuba because you can't get it, so it's erased from memory. But the word survives in other ways. And so, as far as what is Yangi used for? Yangi is inseparable from Eshu. So, opening roads, the idea of incarnating a deity into a shrine, of asking for guidance, of asking for mercy, of asking for blessings and luck and love to come your way. Yangi is where it all starts. Eshu tastes of every offering, and so Yangi is the center of it. Even within those houses that might work with Eshu more in a Quimbanda way, Yangi still finds a purpose. Yangi is still there in the shrines because it is the thing that spirits can go into. It's a porous, muddy stone. Those things of the earth can find their way into other things of the earth. I also think the word laterite is completely boring.
Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with that. Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Um,
stone that yeah, just how it it looks like it's asking for palm oil.
it needs some not dryness. It looks overly dry,
Yeah.
right? And so they tell you like don't let it get dry, don't let the shrine get dry. Like pour alcohol or honey or palm oil, and in time these things build up. There's the Legba shrines of Benin are famous for this too, where you see the horns on top. And
Mm,
I always, yes, Eshu has horns, but if you because they leave the animal heads on top of the shrines, that if you put a goat head on top of a Yangi stone and the offerings keep building up over it, it's just going to turn into that's his head.
mm,
And the shrines in Africa are not washed off; they're just outdoors, and so things harden, things cure, things rot. There's constant build up in that way. In the diasporic traditions, or at least the Cuban, we are try to be much more clean because you're bringing it in your house. But that's one of the things Cubans did is they brought Eshu inside, whereas
mm.
Brazil Eshu is still outside as much as possible. So I don't know, there's a lot of interesting things there. Yangi is a stone. Um, I think that's as far as I know, that's probably the basic there, right? There's other little mysteries you get into, but I'll probably save something for Patreon because Yangi's hard. There's not like we don't have these lapidaries that are like, oh
Right.
yes, these West Africans are using this interesting porous stone to start all rituals and to end all rituals.
Right. And this is what Albertus Magnus says about it. Yeah, no, yeah.
So yeah, but the journey that is always happening that relocates everything back to the center of the crossroads. I mean, I guess I could talk about Mavambo, not just Mavango, as being made of clay, but Mavambo is like the qualidade of Aluvaya that is born from Nkosi's sweat. So the god of war and iron is sleeping and sleeps on red clay, and the sweat and saliva mixes into the soil, and he wakes up and there's this little thing made of clay that's like, what are we doing? Let's go kill things. And Mavambo becomes this warrior path of the deity of the crossroads because he follows Nkosi everywhere. But Mavambo becomes a defender spirit, and it is made of clay. It is
Mm.
like the heads that you see made out of cement. So many of the shrines were made of clay, of earth. Earth is what seals things in, of gives rest to the nest of ingredients. You plant the seeds of your ingredients in something and cover them with earth and clay, or by extension cement, which is nothing if not another type of earth. And that allows the seed to, those things become one collective identity that must grow into fruition and produce results.
Yeah.
So, like planting gold in the ground, you're planting several hundred things into a small pot and allowing them to manifest the fruits of their ontological reality that's now
Yeah.
unified as a singular identity and journeys down the road that Eshu provides. So
Mm.
even if you're seating Eshu, you still have to pray to Eshu beforehand to help seat the Eshu that is going to help you pray to the Eshu.
Hmm.
And there's no, I think about that with talking about the excellent book of magic, right? Of scrying your future selves to ask how to become a better magician to get to the point of being your future selves.
Mm-hmm.
This type of thing is this very Eshu. What is it? Throws a rock tomorrow and it lands in yesterday.
Yeah.
Lives in a house that when he stands up he goes through the roof, but when he sits down it's smaller than a walnut type of thing.
Yeah. He
And
stretches out and his feet go past the veranda and then he curls up in a walnut shell and is
yeah,
content. Yeah.
yeah. So Eshu is in all things is the movement of all energy. Um, therefore the world is demonic, and is a process of messages carried between creation to itself. That is Eshu.
Yeah.
The law to prevent the loss of this, I can't think of a more interesting saint, right, than the loss of the effectiveness of the communication. Saint Anthony of Padua. Like there's
Mm.
something beautiful about that. The silver tongue there of don't let what I'm communicating be degraded, whether it's a prayer or my request to my friend or a warning to an enemy. Like let the medicine be effective, and in this case, the medicine is communication.
Yeah.
So the
Yeah.
same
Yeah.
thing that
Yeah.
connects everything is also the god of communication,
Yeah.
and this is Mercury in another form, um, Hermes in another form. Eshu is as equally present in those conceptions too. The fast moving trickster who is silver tongued, hangs out with thieves and musicians,
Mm-hmm.
And I think that if we can get away from the kind of, even though we talk about that across the board, especially now in the kind of post-internet Alexandria revival, yes, following Jake's ideals of looking to Latin America as an Alexandria, but the internet itself is already an Alexandria in its complete oversaturation of information. So anyway,
both good and bad. Yeah,
yes,
yeah. The internet
it's very Eshu, and character helps you find the map, right?
Yeah, and to see which whether the hat is red or black or both, depending on what angle you're seeing it from, and when to argue about it, and when to realize it's both and neither, and laughing back at you.
Yep. Carrying, speak softly and carry a big dick. That you can whap people over the head, even if you're a Pombagira and a lady Eshu. Yeah, I think do you feel? Please feel free to. And I feel like I have rambled, but also gone through my notes. So,
no, I think that's great. I think ending on I'm aware of, again, like publicly published patakin around Eshu reminding people to make sure that your tongue is the best thing in the world and not the worst thing in the world. I think that note about like how we speak and the good character of the power of our words to be accompanied by good action, whether that's being honest with ourselves or doing what we say we're going to do, or needing to pivot and to change and to have the lubrication at the crossroads to be able to make those hairpin turns, and to not just avoid, but to maybe even thrive from the accidents that we survive and that we can move through, and the frictions within ourselves as well as in the world that can help light a fire under our asses.
Eshu is the accidents we survive.
Right.
The little arguments we survive. So there's that. There's a beautiful side to that, I suppose, of fuck it. That's good. We're good. I was like, oh, well, I gotta not. I don't have to feel like I have to talk about any topic forever. It'll come up again if it comes up.
Oh yeah.
On that note, I can see the skipping stones going towards idols or rooster most easily.
Yeah. Likewise. Let's do idols. We're on a roll here, I feel. From already talking about how a Yangi is of Eshu, is a way to communicate with Eshu, is an instantiation of this idea of what is an image, what is a representational image, what is a non-representational image. Idols gives us a lot to get into, especially also around what's demon and what's demonized as well, right? I feel let's do this. Okay. All right. I want to start with some etymology. Webster's dictionary. No. So idol is likely a mid 13th century word, an image of a deity as an object of worship, with a heavy connotation of pagan worship, from the Old French idole. Idol, graven image, or pagan god, which we get from like the 11th century, apparently. Ultimately, not ultimately, but this is from Latin, idolum, which is either a mental or a physical image, interestingly, or a form, and can also connote apparition or ghost, and is heavily used in church Latin for false god, image of a pagan deity as an object of worship. Ultimately, this is all from eidolon, the Greek for a mental image or an apparition or a phantom, interestingly again, but also material image. So we have this like dividing line between it's the thing and the shadow that's cast, and also the shadow cast on a thing, as well as just a statue, right? Ecclesiastical Greek, it's a pagan idol, from eidos, again, form, shape, likeness, resemblance. So we can get pretty vague into our like realm of forms here, but I think it's pertinent to point out there's definitely some labeling theory going on, right? You find an idol at the end of an accusatory pointed finger, right? We have sacred objects. They have idols.
Yes.
And so idols are very much, in talking about them, we can't not talk about the rejection of them. and I do want to get into that in a variety of ways.
Just a few
Monist,
light topics for today.
yeah, monist, henotheist, quote, monotheists, religious traditions and practices have a lot to say about rejecting idols. There's also this issue of who or what possesses the idol, either in the sense of instantiating into or out of the, I don't know, statue crying blood or what have you, or simply of who that thing now belongs to. And there's something here I want to get into about like what is vehicle and what is effect or momentum, which again can't help but find Eshu everywhere, right? So I want to start with like there's a famous midrash about Abraham when he's young and he's working for his father in his father's idol making shop. Appears in Genesis Rabbah chapter 38. It's also found in the Quran, I believe, as well, although I don't know the details on that. I do know that Hia ben Abba, a third generation Amora, tells this story that Abraham is, which is a midrash. It's extended universe stuff, right? And it's based on the Torah passage about like why someone dies. That someone has died, and there's an explanation as to why, which then gives us a background in Abraham before he becomes Abraham. And so, baby or young Abraham is working at his father's idol shop and tells a man who comes, he's left, well, his father goes off and I know, gets more materials or something, or goes out for lunch. And a guy comes in and wants to buy an idol, and Abraham is already definitely on the side of like the one God, and tells the guy, asks the guy, like, how old are you? And he says, oh, I'm 50 years old. And he goes, well, why would you, with all your 50 years, worship a day-old statue? And the guy's like, well, I'm not too happy about this. And then supposedly a woman comes in and wants to buy one, and Abraham gets so irate about this that he picks up a big stick and smashes all the idols. And when his dad gets back, he's like, what the hell has happened here? And Abraham says, the idol, someone came in and wanted to make an offering to one of the idols, but they all started arguing about which of them should receive it, and the biggest one picked up a stick and smashed the others. And when his father says that couldn't happen because these are just statues, he that's his gotcha moment. He's like, aha, yet you worship them. This leads young Abraham to be marched in front of Nimrod, who then goes through why he won't worship any of the elements. That he will not worship fire because water puts out fire. He will not worship clouds because the wind moves them. He will not worship the wind because people can withstand the wind. And so in frustration and in punishment and as a test of Abraham's one God, Nimrod has him cast into the fire, and Abraham is indeed saved by God. So we have this story very early on about like part of the piety of Abraham is that he refused to profit from the sale, the manufacture of idols, and that he took the difficult path that was the right thing to do. And there's all sorts of other like moral parables that are drawn out of this. But we have this strong sense that like the idols are things that we should mistrust in some sense, whoever the we of that is. The flip side of this, in the small O orthodox sense, is holy statues. Right? Is those things treated with reverence either as a stand-in for the divine or literally considered an instantiated aspect of divinity that dwells there? And this definitely makes me, you made a slight thing that reminded me of this earlier, a shout out to Timothy Landry that we saw talk at the Boscastle conference, distinguishing European models of spiritual representation, where we can talk about images of God, and distinguishing it from various West and Central and maybe East African models of spiritual ontology. That this is not a representation of the thing; it is the thing is received, is born, is dwelling there.
It is a specific model or exemplar of a monkey hand, that a monkey hand is not representing grasping. A monkey hand by its nature has spent an entire incarnation grasping, and because of that, its purpose in grasping does not stop simply because it is no longer attached to a living entity. And the ontological life of grasping as a concept is therefore possible within a money charm. And this can be many things from
There's certain plants that curl around and look like fingers that are used for
Yeah.
certain things. You can put money in it; it protects it in that way. But I really appreciate that articulation because it is a missing link into I don't know if it's a missing link so much as just I you do not see things described on their own terms. That so much of the description has been from the pejorative examination of the magical worldview.
Yeah.
And so it is nice to take away the pejorative where symbolism and representational are not hard and concrete and are very impersonal, but you can look at what a given culture associates the ontological life of something being, not symbolism. And you can say, okay, this is attached to this, it does these things, and therefore start to understand why the vocabulary of something isn't about the specificity of a specific recipe, but about gathering enough right things that ontologically give growth to the purpose that is at hand.
Yeah. 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 And like you said, there's a well, like wouldn't you say? It makes me think of the mess of colonialism that's getting in the way of understanding this stuff from a European or Eurocentric perspective, right? Especially if we're including in idols things called fetishes and fetishism,
Yes.
right? Which requires us to get real post-colonial about this, right? Fetish it like comes from European and specifically Portuguese interactions with West African material culture, and is rooted in fetizo, right? A spell, which is again from the Latin for artificial, as well as facere to make, right? And so it's really tied up in early modern colonialist attitudes of what are West African people doing. And so,
and what if the sorcerer called is a feiticeiro?
Yeah.
This is intrinsically tied into notions of magic, but also deception by connotation.
Yeah. Making false things, making things that aren't properly Christian, for instance. So you got William Pietz doing like ethnohistorical study of fetishism, and he talks about this during the term originating in the coast of West Africa during the 16th and 17th centuries, and he distinguishes on the one hand like actual African objects that are called fetishes in Europe, with indigenous theories of them, and on the other hand, the idea of the fetish or a kind of object to which the thing applies. And so this like concept of fetish emerged from the encounter between Europeans and Africans in this very specific historical context. And there's a guy, Peter Salabras, who summarizes that like Pietz in this study from like 94 shows that the fetish as a concept was elaborated to demonize the supposedly arbitrary attachment of West Africans to material objects, and that the European subject was constituted in opposition to a demonized fetishism through the disavowal of the object. So exactly, you have this thing that they're doing that isn't right and isn't real, and is a divorcing, and all of that is tied up. This is happening 16th, 17th century. By the time we get into the 18th century, we've got Hegel and people like that mapping this positivist model of moving from primitive ideas to enlightened, which just so happen to be European ideals, and the idea of lesser peoples being obsessed with images and material, and that the higher order of things means that we must move towards a more abstracted and representational understanding, which is all part of the mess of how it's difficult to understand. It can be difficult to come from a Western occultist model to understand what's going on in African practice and material culture.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's worth mentioning always, as uncomfortable as it may be, that you cannot have the Enlightenment without the slave trade and colonialism.
Yeah.
The ideals that are supposedly the pinnacle of Western civilization are tied up in that triangle, and it does us no good to ignore it. Through that, like fetish is born from this intersection of commerce and religion too.
Right. Yeah.
And religion itself is a difficult concept. Cue normal selling of Karen Armstrong's Fields of Blood. Wyatt McGaffey's examination of Kongo Minkisi and the re-examination of the fetish articles, I think the late 70s. There's a lot there. fetish itself as if we're going to go into like foundational texts of anthropology, right? Like there's something that is so intrinsically this power object that is created. If you're talking about Minkisi, right? I think McGaffey's big, not his big quote, a quote from him. It's beat into my mind somewhere. Fabricated things, but they can be invoked to produce desired effects and have a will of their own. And they have willfully command the behavior of humans. They cannot speak or move of their own accord, but they're considered superior to ordinary people, and they're able to produce effects at a distance. So Minkisi are especially what is being described as fetish in this examination of objects that are brought in and carried around, something portable. And it's interesting that relics are not compared to this within the Catholic worldview, but they are from a Protestant critique, right?
Yes.
And so there's this constant reexamination of like, again, is it Family Guy that always goes back to Martin Luther? But the point of the Nasarima paradox, right? There's that famous teacher or whoever it was that was talking about trying to illustrate to people these people that strangle themselves in brightly colored cloth and pierce their flesh to hang precious metals and things from. And they're talking about American culture from a critical eye, and Nasarima is America backwards. So the idea that, again, outstretched finger, they have fetishes, they're doing it weird, they have idols, is ultimately something there. I think there's an interesting twist on that again once we get past the racist colonialist trappings that are all inherently there, to examine what we make idols of ourselves that are false hope. So we talk about and you can examine this in something like the concept of American gods, right? Of media, of money, of fame being God that are searched for, and that those idols in the, to borrow from Exuma, that, Baal will be your downfall. That if you see the Buddha on the road, kill him type of mentality, right? That never meet your heroes. All of those things of the fall from the pedestal, that when we place a teacher, a lover, or anybody on a pedestal, they will fall. They have to be allowed to be human and make mistakes.
Yeah.
And how they deal with that, how they clean up from the palm oil spilling, as it were, to Eshu. But that there's something there of I think I talked about it last time with the satanic pregnancies, right? But there's some notions of like modern evangelical Christianity that are still like, that's still really, this isn't always just about butts in the seats and giving money over to create new divisions in the name of superiority and racial and class inequality. But the idea that what are you putting faith in that does not have a basis in reality? Could be interesting to examine. Idol, not necessarily as the statue or the object of grace that anything could be, but what is it when we say it's just material objects, when we lose something, or like, it's fine, it's just material things. I like material things. We all like material things. But this, I think there's at least something redeemable in this concept of false idols, right? This idea of what false worship is. And I think there's even a notion there from looking at the Hebrew, right, of not falling into idolatry, is idol being an English word that comes later, or from the Latin and the Greek, but still that strange worship is what is being talked about. Is literally the Hebrew that's there, and what qualifies strange, that it's not what you do. And the conflict between the Elohimist camp and the Yahwist camp, and these things that happen that we see in scripture of like moving from one primary god amongst a pantheon to this is the only actual god, and the rest are illusory, that we see evolve all the way through Islam, which is perhaps the most monotheistic of the big three, right? Of eliminating all other possibilities, if it weren't for those satanic verses.
Right. And early Christian exorcism as well, which does a massive job in repainting. You don't just have other gods, or our God is more powerful than your God, but your gods aren't really even gods.
Yeah. And the Christian rephrasing, right, of his demons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Why it is Eshu is not Satan is like because in the Yoruba translation of the Bible, the missionaries smartly this started in the New World actually, and we've talked about it before, and I think that was first pointed out in oh God, it's the book on Mashimon rites of
Sacrifice.
sacrifice. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Where the innovation of the Franciscans specifically, who had now been given the mission to convert the New World, of translating the Bible into the native language, which means you are not introducing new concepts, you're reordering concepts.
Mm.
So you call the devil by a local god name, you call God by a local god that is closest to Christian conceptions of God. So in the Yoruba Bible, originally, Satan gets replaced by Eshu. And this might fit the Old Testament Satan a little bit better as far as an arbitrator, as a lawyer, as an advocate, as the accuser. Yeah. That God's henchman or policeman or tollkeeper or scorekeeper. But it's certainly, by the time we get to the New Testament idea, just it becomes something different. And whether that's Manichaean, Zoroastrian split influence, I don't know, but that's the dangerous side, is saying that your deity is our worst nightmare demon.
Is the source of all evil, yeah.
The source of evil, as opposed to it's that oversimplification through translation, right? Translator trade that happens. So
the accusation of idolatry that you raised with like the Reformation rejection of Catholicism is also interesting in these terms, because it starts to stretch the fixation upon image or object, and object again becomes not just representational things. It's commonly talked about how many of the Catholic saint statues are defaced or destroyed in the Reformation, in the protest of the Protestants. But it goes a lot deeper than this. Like, a lot of Protestant sources decry papists' worship of the cross itself, not Jesus or God, but that there's an idolatry of the crucifix or the cross that gets in the way of the direct communication. And there's clearly political implication here already, but also rejecting the false spiritual power of holy water, of blessed salt, of the chrism in some cases, and of incense also as empty idolatry, which is fascinating, because it's not just about using images. It's there's an accusation of Catholics mistaking the vessels, or even more cynically, the mere trappings of spiritual power for the power itself, which is fascinating when we get into like what's instantiating the movement of making things happen, right? And this is arguably part of a wider secessionist disenchantment of God's natural miracles and intercession, especially as an intercession that can be petitioned by clerical authority. And that's again where the reformers get most political, right? Your Catholic priests can't do the things they claim they can do. But again,
unless there's a demon, and then we go back to Latin, right?
Exactly. That all these tools of sanctification and exorcism were often still employed by Protestant magicians, spiritual workers, folk healers, cunning folk, right? The Reformation, in this sense, marks far more a set of like theological arguments than a radical shift in on the ground magical practices, right? There's this, even the sense of like, even if we aren't Catholic anymore, these spirits might be, or at least still afraid of it. And in that sense, it's part of an appeal to historical precedent, if not actually ritual precedent.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah. The old religion still has some power.
Another common cell for me, but Secret Life of Puppets goes into that, right? Our excitement by the world of the arabesque and the horror is partially because with the Protestant death of the miracle, that our reliance on fear to feel something more than ourselves, and the exemplars given of demon movies and going back to the old religion we have to go before what we have now to validate those things. I think
cessationism is also interesting when you get into it, because it's again got this like positivist model of thinking we're better than our ancestors. Cessationism, the fact that miracles don't happen anymore is because people in the past were childish and needed to be shown by God that God was real, but now we know better and we're smarter and more educated and more European. We don't need that anymore, and so it can't happen anymore. it's still based on this positivism of colonizing our own ancestors as well as other people's. Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's right. That's like one like the Golden Bough is really important collection of folklore, and I think it's important to understand the conceptions and the advanced like everything. Things have to be read in their context, especially the time in which they're written.
Mm.
And Fraser is still locked in this idea that magic evolves into religion, as opposed to religion is a labeling concept that happens later to certain magical traditions,
Yeah.
but not all on an equal footing. And that complexity is difficult, especially when we get post Hegel and everything else. Like it just there's a lot there. I also feel with idolatry, idols, graven images and fetish. For me, fetish is a reclaiming term. I am happy to embrace this term as objects of power, because it is a fuck you. It is this man-made object does connect to the unseen world.
Mhm.
And I can help you do that as a witch, as a as a businessman, as any of these things that we're doing, because the spiritual marketplace is foreign to the Christian mindset, except that it's not. It's just labeled as foreign.
Right. The tourism trade that is the swapping and stealing of relics.
Of relics of time, of
Mhm.
money, of tithe to like, I thought it was that history of the papacy that I watched on, I don't know, it was Prime or something, or it was one of the things that it posited in the first part is that like, this is the king of the largest population on the planet. It was like a 1.2 billion is a lot of fucking people. It is. And it is taxes that are received from that. Like, there's no way, like the papacy history is also just fucking fascinating, but, terrifying. But in addition to all that reclaiming, I think it's important. And I want to give a nod to, Idolatry Restored by Schulke on this. He's looking specifically at the role of, not just the role, but the artist, and fetish as icon, as eidolon, as many things that are there, things that are not just mere idols, and this relationship of how to through traditional slash archaic slash artistic means to bring something, a fetish into being, which both invigorates the artist, especially if they're in this magical mindset, that there is something atavistic about all of it. That there's something being channeled through and exemplified in the final form that then is so it's a reciprocal process of the creator and creation, that explores something there in a really in his usual wonderful, deep, and wordy and poetic way. And so there's, because of specifically objects of devotion, for the most part, not actually being as public as people might observe. We hear about them, but until recently, we didn't really see them a lot, right? Like it was, we hear about things and you have to go on pilgrimage to see them, which is, that part has always been commercial, but that there's this idea of like dosing the darshan out of something and not revealing everything, not putting on public display of, something about how, and he's not saying this, but you could draw comparisons to how like the finest artwork is on display in museums, and that upholds that art isn't for everyone, and at the same time also keeps the value of art higher. And that there's something to that with, like, look at Tibetan tankas, which have a curtain in front of them, and were at the height of your visualization meditation, or during your initiation, the tanka was revealed to you after you were studying the text and had memorized it, and now you didn't have to visualize, but you could hold what was revealed in the tanka in your head at a later point. And because you had seen it and you had done the work to support that. So the notion of having images revealed to you as certain parts, even within masonry, right? At certain points in the supposed middle chamber lecture of like, here are notions of that are emblematic, part and parcel, perhaps having their own ontological exploration that we can look at, but things from scripture or that can be then used to exemplify the values and the
the mores of, specifically in that case, the second degree. So
Yeah.
artist, fetish, icon, eidolon, worship, artist as magician, magician as artist, not just magical. That the creation itself might not be magic for everyone, but it can easily be a vessel for that. I also, my brain is still wrapping itself around things that Barbara Browning, who was my advisor and one of my teachers for my master's, she's an amazing writer and theorist and just amazing teacher. Also studied with Robert Ferris Thompson, who is worth noticing for anything Congo and Afro-diasporic. But she does a class on theories of the fetish, which I think she said started with Michael Taussig. But the idea was how theories of the fetish, or how to do things with objects. And it was looking at the three ways in which a fetish is typically invoked to refer to an object with performative power, which can be through magic, through commodification, or through sexual displacement. And then in an ethnographic context, fetish is usually understood as a derogatory one, indicating like a naive belief in the animation of objects, right? But it was that model of objects that allowed for Marx and Freud to elaborate theories of the power of objects we often take for granted. So rather than applying Marxist and psychoanalytic theory to objects examined through the ethnographic context, she goes the other way and looks at the objects themselves as theoretical lenses through which to reconsider Marx and Freud and the extensions and critiques that they generated. So looking at Minkisi, which are described by McGaffey, I believe, as object poems, and therefore invite a relationality of ontology just by the nature of that, right? There's something there. It's not an object by itself. It's an object poem. And the even diasporic, she calls them reformations of things like voodoo dolls, and how those objects can and do make things happen. That through, and again, going through performance theory, this is performance studies department, the exploration of all these things of like, how do objects do what they do? And the recognition that an object has performative power outside of our ascription of it having performative power, but it is enhanced by our projection of performative power. So yeah, lots there, yes. Amazing teacher, great stuff on YouTube. I'll probably link to it in the Patreon, just as far as the relationship between, even we're talking here between like Schulke's idea of the artist and the eidolon and the reciprocity of that process of creation, similar to the relationship between the writer and the audience, the reader, that oh God, who is it? Is it Bars? I think it might be Bars talking about how a reader reading a book is like the book is the violin, but it has to be picked up and played. And like that this is the exact same thing that I want to rail against, if we fill in what the author cannot explain, or that we are unable to understand the author, and we fill that in with our own biases and information, and therefore do not actually understand the author's words, is also exactly the beautiful thing about it, that we are giving life to that necromantic object, right? My obsession with all reading is an act of necromancy, that the ghost sometimes is beautifully fleshed because you are studied, and because you are inspired, and because you are extrapolative. And sometimes that flesh is a beautiful, exquisite corpse, that a chimera that will not produce fertile fruit because you have stitched it through. And to extend that out is, again, making an idol perhaps of our own memory of a situation, where we think that our own memory of something is so sacrosanct, but we don't acknowledge that it is completely perverted to our own bias of against or for ourselves, or perhaps to fit the greater narrative of what we think that we are, who we are. You see this in people recounting things where they are always the victim or always the hero, or beyond reproach, when, there are 5,000 sides to every story, but at least nominally 3 when there's 2 people, right? There's yours, mine, and the truth. And perhaps in a pluralistic decolonialist sense, we can acknowledge that all 3 exist
simultaneously, and the acknowledgement that as we remember something more and more, we are at fault and change our memories by thinking about them. Those writers are amazingly gifted in this. I am trying to remember this the most accurate way I can, and yet by codifying it, your brain gives into the codification and does not accept that you are not remembering it wrong or different, or that other people might have other things to say. So
Yeah.
those people who only self-journal their chronicles against other people are often the most inaccurate of relations, because they are not, there's no barometer of accuracy, there's no barometer of context, there's no barometer of anything other than you reifying your own bullshit.
Gets real solipsistic, yeah.
Yeah, the onomastic impulse of magicians and people. Anyway, so idols. Hey, yeah, what about that?
What
Give us a
about that?
Bullock any day.
Love it.
Feeling that one got that was lovely. All of these topics there was like, God damn. Okay. So Belladonna. No, I don't. I have. There's some thought here about, and maybe it's just a brief segue of one, meaning beautiful woman because of the dilation of pupils through the use of poison applied to the eyes.
Yeah.
The notion of an idol being both salvation and damnation when the balance is not maintained through its limitation, right? That an idol can be a sacred, as someone who makes something called fetish and idols and this type of thing, it should do what it says, and at the same time, it is not like, is it the end of the world if it's lost? Are you punished? There are different ramifications and permutations of those depending on which traditions you're working in and what exactly you put in that the animated force of, there is something to the kind of Christian notion that these pagan statues were animated by demons, in the sense that it doesn't have to be Thoth answering your prayers. It has to be a messenger, a legion of Thoth that can get the message to Thoth and act as Thoth with that authority. And so I guess my last emphasis there is idols are intrinsically tied into the notion of legion. Maybe that's something we can talk about and expand in other form later, because we've talked about legion as a demon, and it certainly is its own type of magic. But I guess all that to say is that the application of poison for beauty is there in an idol, and therefore, interestingly, there for Belladonna. Perhaps.
Yeah. It is the dosage that makes it so, right?
Yeah, little Paracelsus.
Right. What can we do?
Paracelsus, I don't even know one Celsius. Anyway. Caffeine is such a strange thing. I forget that it makes you think.
Hopefully the tongue keeps up, right?
If you take the right caffeine, it does, and apparently makes you transatlantic.
the wittiest of insulting voices, yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. So Belladonna, right? We're talking about like things that get called devilish, right? It certainly has a fair share of those names, right? Along with Deadly Nightshade, it's devil's cherries, devil's berries, also therefore witch's berry, and even into being called sorcerer's cherry sometimes. Devil's herb. Sometimes the belladonna is directly translated and it's called fair lady. It's banewort. It's literally the bad plant. Poison blackberries. It looks a little bit like a thing, but is a bad version of it. Even gets called Kirkeon apparently, and there are some associations or claims that it was involved in the pharmaca that the sorceress Circe administers to Odysseus's sailors that drives them mad and quote turns them into swine, right? How literal is that? How making them lose their human senses. As a poison, for it is definitely been used to just straight up poison people. Like you said, there's this fascinating thing about its use to dilate pupils in both cosmetics and love magic as well. And there is some cool like research on mirror neurons that shows that thing that they say in Amelie is kind of true, that people are more likely to be charmed by you if you appear charmed by them, right? You are not just having big anime eyes, you are again mirroring not too much of this like sex at dawn stuff, but you are mirroring an attraction or an arousal response by doing that. It's got other medicinal uses as well. Cold pepper is big on how it has a cold nature, and this coldness can cause sleep, the cousin of death. In others, madness, and shortly after death. So he's still like it's bad. Like John Parkinson's Theatrum Botanicum has a bunch to say about it as Deadly Nightshade is more dangerous than the others. That's why it's called that. He says it's cold in the 4th degree, does some very particularly cooling things, and so gets used in a lot of cooling things, cooling tedious hot fits of agues, allows rest or sleep, which is much hindered if people are having fevers and things like that. Can take away violent pains of the head proceeding from a hot cause. Is used again. The leaves are bruised and their juice is applied to hot inflammations, including St. Anthony's fire. So there's another fiery St. Anthony thing. The shingles, other fiery or running cankers, and cools a bunch of things. But again, everyone is like, be especially careful with it, especially careful around children, because they're going to want to eat them. And Gerard says the same, although he kind of seems to confuse, or people report that he confuses Deadly Nightshade with Sleepy Nightshade, and says that both of them have these like shining black berries which are very beautiful, and that children and even women will lust after them, but that they are vile and filthy and they'll kill you. In terms of other in the field of unattributed folklore, I've seen sometimes said that there's a harvesting rule that says that the devil loves Belladonna so much he guards it most of the year, and that the only safe time to harvest it or to kill the plant without earning his wrath is on May Eve, when he's called away for the witch's sabbat. So we have some sabbatic connection.
Or to release a black hen so that the devil chases the black hen.
Oh, okay.
So if he hasn't left for the Sabbath yet, you still can get the plant.
Interesting. Yeah. That definitely feeds in with a bunch of stuff we'll get to with roosters and gaming diabolic pacts for sure. I've seen some claims that some plant called Atropos is associated with like Bacchic and Dionysian cults, and there's a connection made to the rave juice that the Maenads are taking to go into trance and to dance and commit their lewd and libidinous acts. And so I don't know, with this Maenadic association, do you have any thoughts on Belladonna and flying ointments?
It's inseparable from these things. I think, I mean, even the notion, right, of dwale, be from Vale, the trance, right? Like there's some people say it comes from the French meaning grief, but there seems to be this association with its kind of analgesic, yes, but that the poisoning as it starts to happen, right, is that it starts by confusion and initial kind of like tingling and confusion, followed by visions and phantasms. It by itself does not seem to, in many accounts, does not necessarily give the complete notion of traveling by flight, but in combination with other plants, often that seems to be added. Just in the same way that like henbane is always associated with this kind of theriomorphic or things, fur or feathers growing out of the skin. And as those grow, like as you can move again, as the various levels of the poison allow you to be completely at ease, kind of like when you are overly stoned, I've heard, how you're like, I could move, but it is really hard to, versus slightly agitated and you have to move. This notions, I think, the external and internal stimuli of how things are combined are quite interesting. It has so much overlapping lore with Mandrake, but that topically Belladonna is not going to be a problem the way that internally it would, right?
Right.
That there's so much folklore around one berry kills a child and three kills an adult, and yet that there's no way to know that unless
Right.
you do it. But it's a good rule of thumb of like, dosage makes the cure type of thing. I think with flying ointments in general, because it's listed, it's just I know Shulky puts it to Saturn, Venus, and the Moon, even though it's usually attributed to Saturn, and because he calls that the hexing triad, I think, like a very witchy way of doing it. I do have the spirit retinue as he lists it in Green Mysteries is catatonia, transfixture, somnambulism, sublimation, wailing, infernal descent, paramnesia, queenly proclamation, baleful injunction, looming threat, arresting beauty, flocculating shadow, and monstrous revelation. Which that's give me some poesis right there.
Right.
But what I like in the correspondences too, which I think gives some forms here. Of course, he's going to link it to Atropos, right, because of the name being linked to the more the fates. But like the virtue being surrender, the ritual action being trance, the medicine being analgesia, so pain relief.
Right.
The poison being anti-cholinergic, cholinergic. I can't speak. The therapeutic side is mercy, and the affliction is despondency. I like this description of the emblem being a pallid lady clad in a mauve raiment, crowned with green leaves, standing amid ruins and exalting a human skull. There is, I think, Belladonna, because of its use as an analgesic and as somnific, a sleep aid, uh, echoes to dream very well. And I think the ecstasy that's brought on by other alkaloids in flying ointments things, the belladonna is the let's go to sleep and leave your body side of things personally. Does that mean that you're going to fly? Not all descriptions of flying ointments are always about flying. Sometimes they're digging. Sometimes you grow very fast legs. There are certain lores that are fascinating to me of like belladonna and the nightshades are taboo to Oshun in the diasporic lore, but not specifically Atropa belladonna. It's actually Solenum nigrum that is the one that kills Oshun in honey. And so it's the reason that we taste honey. But because of the conflation across all belladonnas, across all nightshades,
Right.
Atropa belladonna is often cited as this side of no, you taste honey before we offer it because of belladonna. But again, folk names being what they are is such an interesting side of things. I love praise her before harvesting. So the mandrake, there's all this martial influence of like digging up with an iron blade or tying it to a dog. And belladonna is a black hen on May's Eve and or beautiful lady, great mistress, empress of herbs. Like you're plying the plant, like let me harvest some of you so that she will cause sleep and not death. You want her good side as opposed to her bad side.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot there in the complex web. Also, of course, the notion of we talked about this with foxglove, right? That it's the antithetical side to the remedy against foxglove poisoning is belladonna, the remedy against belladonna poisoning is foxglove. So some view this as if you have a strong relationship with one, it is harder to get a secondarily strong relationship with the other. Doesn't mean it's taboo. I don't think we need to make wars where there are none, unless that's your shit. For some people, it certainly is. So yeah. I also, I think Shulky quotes it too, but it's definitely in my notes for Belladonna, right? From Maldoror, right? Of what has become of Maldoror's first song since his mouth full of belladonna leaves uttered it through realms of anger in a moment of reflection. So yeah, I think there's also some reference to not only killing Roman troops or as well as Cersei's poisoning. So
Yeah, it's a long-standing like poison and a thing that poisoners use and go to. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Me. Um,
Yeah.
I think it's interesting too in this, it's a whole other discussion perhaps, but there's no way to not separate this plant from Venus to me, which I'm very glad that Shulki talks about that because of the Belladonna aspect, right?
Yeah.
Saturn is not, we talk about a Saturnine beauty and like, yes, but that still evokes, if it's beauty, it's Venus. And I I love that shadow side of Venus. It is incredibly witchy. Like, it's just Venus, Moon, Saturn there is something really interesting about the intersection of those three things.
Yeah, yeah. I've been fascinated with Atropos as the oldest of the Moirai of the three fates, and gives their name to this as a scissor wielder for a while. Being very interested in like the magic of cut up and the cut up of magic and the cre
It's so cute.
and the creative endeavor and stuff. But the idea that, like, sure, it's a Saturnine thing to cut the thread of life, right? But framed as part of a beginning, middle, and end, with Clotho, the youngest, spinning that thread and Lachesis measuring it. The cutting is like, this is craft. Like, this is whether we're talking about spinning a yarn, um in terms of like it's an ending that makes a story, many say, right? How does it, a good story ends. I mean, maybe long-running soap operas would disagree with me there. But there's scissors and shears are, yes, like as shear an instrument to gather the wool, and I love that like a ball of wool is called a clue as well. But that this is craft. This is like Venus in her element, right? As artisan, as craftswoman. That like this is spun, it is measured, and it is cut. Like this is how a beautiful thing is finished,
Yeah.
and
That, and
not just the Saturnine mortality of that limitation, but the Venusian container that provides in the stitching of things and the tapestry of life.
how does one make a life beautiful if not to live it?
Yeah.
And by extension, therefore, all life is beautiful in retrospect. Um,
Yeah.
which is
Yeah.
the Venus looking over her shoulder, perhaps.
Uh-huh.
And it's bringing to mind, right, the spindle of necessity, uh,
Mm-hmm.
which is just such a beautiful image, which it felt more like a top when I was little. Those specific tops that you spin and they spin back over on themselves.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But the which specifically refers to the daughters of the goddess necessity that are the fates,
Yeah.
and the planetary orbits around them. But any Spindeline myths, give it to me.
Mm-hmm.
I am Rumpelstiltskin. Um,
Yeah, the spindle side, right? The so again, that Venusian tie to like uh not just maternal ancestors, but like all the female sides of the dead um coming forth. Yeah.
you should look, meaning I'll talk to you later about it. Witches' scissors, witches' tongs in the folk dance, in the kind of greater performative tropes that Morris dancing belongs to, which are
Ooh.
like those clotheslines that open, like we see them in clotheslines, but where you open one end and there's lots of little diamonds that expand and contract, and there's like
Yes.
and
Yeah, yeah,
they're
yeah.
called witches' scissors, and they're specifically like used to go and grab people, which is meant to be like something's coming for you. And
Mm,
there is a tradition of tying certain herbs to them, of which one
mm,
of them might be things like Belladonna, to show the trivialities of life and fate and how that goes. Um, as
Trivial from trivia. From
right,
trivia. Yeah. Hmm.
um, the notion too of when you say a craft to cutting, having been a special ed art teacher, I can tell you scissors are one of the most frustrating things for 6 to 8 year olds with motor issues. And it's frustrating for some adults. And it's having grown up with a mother who is a quilter, I learned to tell fabric scissors apart, and God forbid I ever touch her gingers. Like it was just scissors have to stay sharper
than a normal knife. A knife is derived by force. Scissors are their gift is in their sharpness and their containment.
Mm.
They are two blades, not one, that work in tandem. And there is an etymology somewhere that connects shears, tijeras in Spanish, to bruja. And I can't remember the exact pattern of its, snakes and ladders version there.
Yeah.
There's something about the things that cut, the things that rend life, that is fascinating. Yeah, Belladonna. Okay. Well, the spindle of necessity, Belladonna. Yeah, rooster spurs. Yeah, rabbit. But I feel like Fortuna Minor might be. I feel mainly because of the Erosum factor, but I can go anywhere.
Yeah. No,
With you, my friend, I can go anywhere.
Absolutely.
I can twice as high. There's something here about the Reading Rainbow song in my head. Yes, so I could see going anywhere. Where would you like to leap to?
Yeah, let's go. Let's talk Fortuna Minor then. Okay. I think the connections will. I feel they'll become apparent. There's something. Okay, so there's
At least an uncle.
There's an antipathy here in terms of the coolness of Belladonna and its gothic beauty and melancholy and beauty to Fortuna Minor's solary sanguinity at the front with an undercurrent of choler. So it's a mobile exiting figure. It's a very caffeinated figure. It's generally airy, at least by the Hedonian way of reading it, although there is that French way of organizing the figures by the first two lines, where two single dots is fiery. There is a huge emphasis in Fortuna Minor on swiftness, on quick fixes. There are so many ways it's helpful to contrast it, that the actions of the sun are like a pair of scissor blades in terms of both of them fulfilling a function together, right? Contrary to Fortuna Major's slow indefatigability, it is a figure of celerity, of doing it fast rather than doing it right, maybe. Fortuna Major has such a workaholic, hard-won, lasting success. For the Lesser Fortune, in a good position, is a very slick figure. Big connection to the dende, the palm oil that lubricates things. It's a slick figure of easy come, easy go that can help us let go of things, to duck out early, to worry less, and to float on. If it's in a good position, because also contra to Fortuna Major, it's way more choleric when backed into a corner, as opposed to Fortuna Major's tendency towards melancholy, of the heaviness of dutiful leadership. In contrast, Fortuna Minor can be a little short-sighted and a little self-centered, as opposed to Fortuna Major's long-suffering martyrdom, right? So Hayden talks about how it betokeneth choler, hastiness, swiftness in all things, signifies a great suddenness and quickness in all things. It's an excellent feature for a first responder, but something of a disadvantage for keeping an even keel. The Lesser Fortune has a lot of fast luck that doesn't necessarily hold fast. It is a figure that is routinely, that is often great in a crisis, but makes trouble in peacetime. There's a lot of it talking about escaping brushes with danger, which might be danger that you, if didn't directly cause, weren't paying enough attention to never have to have escaped in the first place. It's mostly a lot of success with complications, passing luck, indifferent good, yes, but both opportunities and also a certain opportunism that can not always be great. There's a lot of talk about choleric unquietness, which may not necessarily express itself as shouting matches or violent outbursts, but might include that. But restlessness, itchy feet, apparent distraction, other minor frictions. There is also a bunch of stuff about how it's a very loyal figure, but is also the loyal friend who is constantly spoiling for a fight. not with you necessarily, but with whoever else there might be. There's also like a kind of thrill-seeking tendency to it. Hayden talks about how it can signify the end of war shall be good, but for peace it is ill. It has this canny ability to change luck, to upend bad into good, but also if left unchecked, it will make conflicts where there wasn't any before. Like especially say in the 12th house, we actually really love to see it. It's an escapologist, so it's great in the house of restrictions. It says no, you'll get out of prison, you'll get out of debt, you'll escape your enemies. But the fourth book also has this thing about like the changes of fortune to be frequent from good to evil and from bad to good. So like it wants to change things. It's not a figure that is most comfortable with peaceful conditions. It will find something to upset. But in an upset, it is great. And there's something here around the frictions that help you either grow or learn the same lesson again, shall we say. There's a lot of like indifferent good teaching lessons about short-termism versus turning a situation on its head and shifting situations between unfavorable and favorable, and vice versa. And so it's a really interesting figure in terms of its reads as a on first impression in comparison to Fortuna Major's like very serious self-sovereignty as like as a kind of workaholism. It looks like the laid back one, but is actually the one that's going to lose its rag more often. And constant lessons about managing your anger and your temptations towards the quick fix of losing your temper, and what that actually produces. A lot of like great hopes but small gain as well. A lot of there's great for warning you about stuff and getting out of stuff once you're in trouble. But just this repeated refrain of like it's also like when is swiftness not the best course? If you like, yeah.
I think within Ifa, Irosun is talked about. Irosun Meiji is talked about as it means sounding Osun, right? So there's this concept of warning, and I think sometimes our Cubanness kind of takes it to always like, oh God, it's a warning. It's also linked to abundance and family life. Like there is a blessing here. Also, I think what you're talking about, like swiftness is, it's like any alarm. You have to stop and examine why the alarm is going off.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's intrinsically tied to abundance and family life through public ascription, just putting it out there, family dynamics and financial security opportunities, things like that, you might need to consider the context of your actions within the greater effect of your family and material well-being when making decisions. So family becomes incredibly strong, but also an incredible inhibition, or it can be both a prison and wings in this sign, depending on its orientation, right? There's just a lot here. The aspects of growth, both the personal and the collective, are tied together. Its flow and transformation, it is inherently tied to menstruation. So reincarnation is big in this sign, as far as a cyclical nature of life, death, life, death, life, death. Fear, loss, emotional tribulation, the importance of understanding the demons that you put out in the world. And we could say that in a non-Cuban context of like the emotional things that you project upon the world that make your life harder and allow you to not, or don't allow you to see something as it is. Emotions are important, but they are not facts that are universally accessible.
Right.
So this Odu is heavily tied into the need for communication, and it is remedied by deep caretaking, and kind of increased communication, increased nurture in order to get through the sensitivities. Often deals with explosiveness or the dangers of being quick in thought or action. In the same way that when you are pregnant, you need to safeguard what you are carrying. When Irosun falls, you need to safeguard what it is that you might not be looking at. So receiving care, giving care, communal harmony and prosperity, focus on family, community. The very fact might be that someone has damage around their concepts of family and community, and therefore might act hastily and separate themselves from even a positive community. And can happen in this sign. Because the person's nature is to retreat from those same things that have caused problems in the past. So there's a lot of things here. It deals with the security of the home physically, the beams and the inner workings of how a structure stays together, which is similar to inspecting all the individual members of a family and making sure the family is okay and intact. You're only as strong as your weakest link, type of thing. That we need both loss and gain in order to achieve balance. So it is associated with quick and fixes and necessities, but also has tremendous ability to foment ties when embraced as not an odu for gossip, not like avoid that. There's the mysteries of like no one knows what lies at the ocean except God and a Olokun type of mentality of like some things can be a mystery. That's okay. You do not have to know everything, and no one will ever know everything in this sign. We have warning. We have things are not what they appear. So to proceed slowly and with caution and with care for the relationships that you hold in your life that are important.
Yeah. I think of something around like the ability of watchfulness, not just being a constant staring in one place, but being able to make micro adjustments towards the even keel of the sine wave, of the bendability of the willow, rather than the oak that gets knocked down. Something around like flexibility in our easy come, easy go, as opposed to tensing up and then breaking your arm when you fall.
Yeah, I like it. What might be, I'm just going to push it and be like, are there any particular remedies or dietary or behavioral suggestions you would make when this seems to be towards the, you're trying to remedy it or steer it towards the positive?
Yeah, the unhelpful side. There is some stuff about being wary of red things. Funnily enough, we don't want to tip it into full blown like Rubius, not just losing a rad, but like losing the marbles. There's a bunch of stuff about like the ease of the sun and like dumb luck stuff. So in practice, a bunch of lucky things. I've found helpful in a variety of like specific cultural modalities of the client, right? Like what's your family, or what did you grow up doing that was lucky? And to do those things. Specifically, I've also found lemongrass really helpful in terms of like something at least for me, and not just in the name, but like has some citrusy stuff without the sourness, and has all sorts of connotations of good luck, good money, good times, good relationships, things of that nature. The other big remediation I've found helpful is cleaning off with a yellow rag. And I usually favor either a piece of torn yellow or gold cloth, or one of those microfiber yellow dust rags that like vinyl enthusiasts love. And keeping one of those and dusting off head to toe at sunset. And and then either throwing it out or placing it on a point, a marking of the form of Fortuna Minor, to ask the setting sun to take it away. There are some associations with certainly Fortuna Major is the rising sun, and so I think we can think about Fortuna Minor as like at the end of the day, less in terms of the coming of night and more in the kind of colloquial like, but did you die? Like the ability to divest stress, to not carry things on your head, to let things go, to not let things boil over from bottling them up, to dust yourself off, and let the setting sun take that away into the underworld. In terms of its like, elemental form mapped to the body, active or singular or cohering head and heart, and diversifying or expanding or passive, stomach and legs, or stomach and feet. Paying attention, especially when you're running. Maybe I don't run with scissors thing is here. A sense of, again, it's sometimes it's like wheelie dealy kind of nature. It will be fine on the night. It's putting off. It's procrastination as opposed to overwork of Fortuna Major can feel a bit conjunctio, but the difference being that conjunctio is truly like could be good, could be bad. Like in terms of its character with other people, can absolutely be the liar and the used car salesman who is like trying to do one over on you. Conjunctio has a lot more of an amoral quality. Fortuna Minor at heart is trying to be a good dude. Like that says repeatedly, like is not a traitor, is someone that is loyal, but might overestimate what they can get done. Dreams big, but puts it off, and then doesn't get done necessarily. Like that kind of thing. So there's something there about like the heart is focused, the head is focused, but the stomach for things and the legs to do it are a bit more. There's some sea legs necessary for the vicissitudinous waves of fate and fortune.
Yeah, that makes sense because its corresponding Yowa in Congo, in Quimbanda Congo is they say like dynamicism, like notions of elevation, like royalty even, and love. So have a lot of Insasi and Dandalunda and Congo Bila and Gila here. So it's an interaction between the heart and the head are talking, but everything else is kind of all over the place. So there's a need for, but what can you follow through on?
Yeah. Slickness is great, but like if you are sliding out of things all the time, are you going to feel lonely? Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because as much as we decry hyperactivity, or even hypersexuality, the things that allow us to run away from ourselves the most are our head and our heart. Overthinking and overfeeling. And so there's something here about hey, you're not on solid ground. Your feet and your creative drive are elsewhere. So you don't have the legs to follow what your heart and your head are thinking. So proceed with caution on the path. Yeah, okay. I like it. That sounds good. I'll buy it.
I think there's a link here from like the some of the solary and choleric stuff to roosters for sure. Want to go there, right?
Yeah. Sure. Cock away.
There we have.
And if nothing else, the little resounding osun, right? Within the syncretism of way has a little St. Peter's rooster on top. He who cries 3 times to show betrayal, right? What's the oh God? It is something like El que le canto a San Pedro no le volverá a cantar. The one that sang for St. Peter will never sing for him again.
Oh,
That's the loteria refrain for El Gallo, for the rooster, which is number 1 in the Loteria. So this is the first card.
The
But
start of the day.
yeah, the start of the day, but it's also the day never comes again.
Mm.
So, the one that if you cry to, it has a few warnings to it when it's used for divination. But if one is the sanctity and the holiness of this day right now will never happen again. And in context, are you talking shit about someone? If you're talking shit about someone, like that can come back on you. You need to hold your tongue when you need to hold your tongue, and crow when you need to crow, but be careful because consequences.
Yeah, there's a lot of like there's all sorts of rooster lore, but like so much of it comes back to crowing, and again like the power of its tongue and its voice, right? Reputation as fierce, often called solary in connection to not just crowing at the start of the day, but at the middle of the day as well as when it crows at night. It can mean all sorts of things.
They never stop crowing. If they're
never,
crow.
Yeah. I found that interesting. There's a thing about how they presage or announce a change in the air or wind if they sing more often at night than is their usual custom, which again is that point about like if you've been around them, they don't shut up, but they're especially going at night. There's a change going on. And that's often tied to warding off the angel of death or things that go bump in the night, or all sorts of stuff around that. For research on this, I got to dive into the second volume of Ulysses Aldrovandi's Ornithologia. He's one of the great naturalists of the 16th century, left a lot of writings, a lot of books, a lot of illustrations. One of the first dudes to show skeletal structures of animals. Was a chair of natural history at Bologna. Developed a way of pressing flowers to look like paintings so that botany could be done in winter. But his second volume is all about concerning domestic fowl who bathe in the dust, the chicken, male and female. And so that has a bunch of what we call classic zoology, anatomical details, a lot of drawings of chicken butts. A lot of stuff on gestation, a lot of stuff on incubation. He was really into opening up eggs at various stages of development and seeing how the little chick was forming. Stuff about like diseases of birds, a lot of stuff about breeds of chickens as well. Darwin says that he's the best source for our entire history of like domesticated fowl, because he's charting like the different breeds from a very, very early point. He's also, again, as a 16th century naturalist, and again, one of the reasons I like and talk about Edward Topsell so much is that there's also all of this stuff that that modern naturalists are like, yeah, that looks superstitious to us. A lot of stuff about the character of the beast, specifically the rooster's lustfulness, as well as its magnanimity. I can never say that word. Magnanimity, as well as its sympathies and antipathies. Of which some of include has an antipathy with larger barn animals like oxen. Specifically said that don't let them poop in ox's food because it's toxic to them. But interestingly, the antipathy isn't that they'll fight them; it's that they will try and stand on top of them in dominance and courage. And they talk about how they'll do that even with like tame elephants, and certainly seeing roosters do that on like trucks and cars, like the biggest car that's there. They like one of them will try and stand on top of it. That they push back on things that are bigger than them. Alien talks about how they terrify lions and also frighten basilisks. So that link between like basilisks and the cockatrice and the actual cockerel. And Aldrovandi also gets into their auguries, what he calls their mystical interpretation, how they turn up in dreams, as well as their like moral interpretations, again, where he gets into like emblems as well as riddles and proverbs and fables. But he also talks a lot about their use in the sacred rites of the pagans, and talks about how they are sacred to Mars, arguably because they're a fighting bird, whether or not you're doing, cockerel blood sports or not. They have strong beaks and spurs for fighting. Talks about the rooster sacrifices of the Lacedaemonians and various other like soldiering peoples. That galley as a term for a kind of soldier, all that kind of stuff. That they have this choleric quality that is more aligned with, well, with there's plenty of martial stuff, but that they that there's this solary quality to their capacity to give good heat and good courage to things. There's Roman authors that prescribed so they're a food animal, right, as well, and the food is medicine. There's Roman broths from stewing a rooster, which is said to be good to outwardly apply to those in peril from wild beasts. One author declaring that those who bathed themselves in this rooster soup were safe from harm by lions and panthers. The broth of roosters is also prescribed against the poison of serpents. That the cockerel will fight against serpents to defend the hens, and again is the terror to the basilisk, who is this kind of reptilian thing. And there's this courage. How does Lewis Staton Burdock in Magic and Husbandry, which I think is first published in 1905, talks about the courage with which the cock was blessed imparted to the weak virtue that made them brave and strong. Hence the broth was advised for those wasting from long sickness and consumption. But in the cookbooks of the latter part of the 16th century, it is insisted upon that the rooster must not be too old and must be a red one to be effective in restoring the weak to ruddy health. And I love those, like the color stuff going on with that, and how boldness isn't just courage, isn't just a quality of character, but is itself a passion in from Thomas Aquinas at least onwards, if not further, that like boldness isn't just courage as a learned behavior, it's an emotion that you can cultivate and can be helpful or unhelpful, as the Stoics will remind us. But by far the most lore you find is about the cock's cry warding against ghosts, devils, and other night spirits. Whether or not, like you said, it's Peter's denial 3 times before cockcrow, before the things can be exorcised, or it's like underwitching lore of rooster's calls in all sorts of stuff. Lots of it in Hamlet specifically, about like the ghost leaving when the cock that is the trumpet to the morn doth with his lofty and shrill sounding throat awake the god of day, and at his warning, whether in sea or fire, in earth or air, the extravagant and erring spirit hies to his confine, and of the truth herein this present object made probation. All sorts of stuff in there. There's some cool stuff that Aldrovandi talks about as well, where he's like, he's not interested in the what we would describe as more mundane explanations for things. He cites Pliny accounting that elder wood that is cut for horns or trumpets is better if the elder hasn't heard a cock crow. And Aldrovandi points out, on the one hand, that this is probably environmental. He said that woodland places where roosters don't dwell are typically drier and thus produce more sonorous wood, which sounds like a not a rejection, but like a naturalistic explanation for a magical effect. But then you get into like, well, why aren't roosters around to dry conditions? And we're back to the humoral qualities of everything. That humoral theory is everywhere. Yeah.
Roosters aren't around in dry conditions. I mean, it's hard to make noise if it's dry, personally. But yeah, that's interesting.
Or at least the dry woodlands, right? They do bathe in dust. And they'll bury them, well, not bury themselves, but like dig little holes and then get all cozy in them. Like
in a matter of minutes, they will dig a hole, and you're suddenly tripping over. The bird knows to move before you step there, but all of a sudden there's a foot deep depression because the bird was like,
Yeah.
It's also how they get rid. That's their bathing. They're getting rid of mites.
Yeah.
So it's
something that just occurred to me when you said like, oh, they know to move before you do. I saw a random scrolling reels, and there was a soldier who'd been on a tank. He was a spotter in a war zone, and he brought a chicken with him, and said that the chicken would see movement and things way before he did, and that this was like became the mascot of the tank platoon or whatever. because it could spot movement before they could. So again, this warding, this watchful movement, this quick like what's there kind of thing. Yeah, sorry, just made me think of that.
Interesting.
There's a bunch of saints that are especially associated with hens. There's a good couple Italian Marys who are like Marys of the hens. There's also in English there's a charm that or a poem charm nursery rhyme that Burdick quotes that with the blessing of Saint Germain I will me so determine that neither fox nor vermin shall do my chickens harm. Which is a fun one. And then from
just putting it out there for another nod for our my just telling you specific charms I want in Enochian for the average chaos inherited witch to feel like traditional craft of the other tongue of Enochian. And yet, while I appreciate the crown of the crowned beasts, why is there no word for goat? So.
Yeah. The goat charm I came up with. I posted it on my my Patreon, I think, for working on like beast charms. Again, this idea of like Enochian as Adamical and Adam not just naming the beasts but making pacts and agreements with them. So I like the use of the Adamical tongue in beast charms and things. And so having to use these kind of kennings, these epithets of the horned beast with 4 legs that are split, whose feet are split, right? Are cloven, because there isn't a set word for it. Yeah. Love that stuff. Yeah, definitely want to do some more Enochian beast things for sure.
I think about highlighting across we've talked a lot about Eshu today, obviously, and one of the main things associated with Eshu, especially as a sacrificial bird, is a rooster, for its vitality and force and vigor, and it is a very hot blood comparatively to other fowl, and so there's there's joy, vitality, passion that's there in the rooster. It's also the use, right, of a chicken to scratch things away, to distribute dusts and to disperse dusts when you are a powder-based magical system. Not completely powder-based, but where powders play a prominent role in the magical systems, especially those derived of Congo and even to a larger extent West African, Central African cultures, where powders are strewn or thrown. And you are walking across those things that the rooster foot, the chicken foot that you see in hoodoo, to uncover things, to scratch things away, and to also find things, right? Like a rooster by scratching is trying to find insects to eat. So there's that. It also, the rooster foot itself reminds me of Procyon or Procyon, the star of the Beheni, right? That is there because. The sigil for, the image for Procyon is either a rooster or 3 maids, and the sigil for it, which looks particularly Quimbanda, actually, because it is little tridents, 3 tridents joined by an arc, either squared off in some versions or not squared off. It almost looks like it's showing 3 women, like a la the 3 Graces, kind of linked together in their skirts, or conversely, just the rooster's foot, which conveniently forms tridents. So people kind of go back and forth, and there's a lot there of what does it mean to have these little roosters. The rooster associated with Procyon itself, and in the end just protection, because Procyon is such an anti-witchcraft, anti-evil eye star, being the lesser dog star.
Yeah, there's some really interesting stuff when we get into roosters and devilry, both in terms of like warding and empowering, like what's going on there. Most grammatically, like the the Megaton instructs that the seal of Solomon that you make and then put on top of the brass vessel is drawn in rooster blood, specifically at midnight on either Tuesday or Saturday. So again, malefic stuff at work, but specifically the blood of a black cock that never trode hen. So like it's virginal, it still has its vitality, but it's also necromantic. And there's all sorts of ways of averting evil, either in accidental or maleficia terms, across certainly certainly across England that I'm aware of. There's in Yorkshire, there's a practice of you take a living black rooster that's been pierced with pins, and you burn it at the dead of night with all the windows and doors and any crevices all stuffed up. And that's part of the wider practice of like burning livestock that have been bewitched, arguably. But you also see a lot of reports of it's black roosters that are used when you're conjuring. What does Burdick say? Conjuring up little men of the mountains and sacrificing to devils. And it's sometimes said that no white feathers must be on them. So some overlap of like it must be an entirely black animal, right? Like that chthonic stuff, the color of blood and wine in the dark. There's also stuff about like those longer tail feathers of those black roosters being used to open locks and to make one walk invisible while seeing everything. And that crossover, like invisibility is being unseen, but also being in the realm where you can see the unseen, which I find really interesting. The gaming of that stuff gets interesting when you have not the deliberate sacrificing of a rooster because the spirit has asked for it, but getting around what you've promised. So there's a case that Kierkegaard cites in Forbidden Rites from 1465 in Norfolk, where a bunch of guys are necromancing around trying to find buried treasure, as you do, and they invoke this spirit of the air at Bunwell, and they promise it the body of a Christian man in exchange for it leading them to treasure. And the spirit reveals in a crystal the location of a hill filled with treasure, all very cross. Again, folk necromancy is a broad category of land whites and fairy gold and stuff like that. So they leads them to this place, whereupon these treasure hunters baptize a rooster with a Christian name and sacrifice it to the spirit. So there's this.
Dude.
Yeah. So it's now a Christian rooster. And it's interesting as a parallel or an inversion of the thing we talked about with baptizing animals to protect them. That you give it a Christian name, so it is so you've fulfilled the letter of the agreement. Which I find really fascinating when we're getting into, is the rooster blood in the Seal of Solomon because it wards off bad spirits like their voice, or because they like it there.
Yeah, I mean, I if we want to get real graphic, I will go alleged here and talk about the use of roosters in sacrifice where the tongue is pulled out, right? Silence things, to silence the crowing, to silence someone speaking against you, to silence so that no one can hear you coming. Any of those things can be done. Generally, the color of the rooster is interesting, right? At least within a more Quimbanda context, right? Like white roosters are used for health, and black roosters are used to stop witchcraft. And a rooster in general is strength and control and just general like good offering, because it increases things. It's not just supplication. It's not just sustenance. It is you can eat a rooster. It takes a lot of effort. It's a tough eat, but the blood flow, the vitality is stronger, so it becomes a quintessential offering in that way. I found that, just to go back and find the quote so that I don't sound like I'm putting out of nowhere. Under the lesser dog star, they made the image of a cock or of three little maids. It conferreth the favor of gods, of spirits, and men. It giveth power against witchcrafts and preserveth health, which is Agrippa, Book 2, Chapter 47. Zion specifically. So the notion here that I also think the notion of a rooster crowing is like a dog barking, and we are much less likely to kill a dog in Western culture. And there's something there, that there's a similar thing of like, even for the dog star to sound alarm and to make sure that we see, have protection and notice our enemies coming, that we would offer something that trips alarm, or can make a loud noise, but is not necessarily it doesn't have to be a dog. We don't have to be literal. That a loud noise is a loud noise. Yeah. Also, just the rooster and its protective, like a rooster protects its property, a rooster protects its hens in the same way that like mother goddesses are often invoked for protection. And you would think like, why are they invoking warrior gods? Because nothing is fiercer than a mother protecting her child.
Right.
And so appealing to Tanit to protect the door because she's now your mother and she will protect the door the way she protects her child. Hybella becomes the stone that burrs the foundations of the city itself, of the house, of the stability of things, but therefore the security of the city walls, and gets associated with Taiki as well. Then, right, like your fortune is secured, that things are secure and in place because of the stone mother, of the mountain mother. All those things are fascinating to me, the overlaps. Associated with giant male lions and just clawed little beasts like roosters, which are the clawing is quite interesting.
I had one more thing which I liked in terms of how we've been, talking about Eshu and about like the devil that liberates, and there's some specifically Luciferian stuff that of Lucifer, maybe not in the modern capital L Luciferian sense, that Al-Jawani quotes Proclus talking about he's talking about Apollo technically, but the language he uses in terms of it's specifically name checking the light bearer, the light bringer, and also has some stuff about accidents on the road and things like that. He says, "We in our sacred hymns at cockcrow sing to Lucifer as the messenger of the coming light, to make the heavens bright and to give us the opportunity to escape all error in the open road. With the rooster's song to offer some relief in those who are ill, or at least to give them the faint gleam of hope, to free those who fear from their trepidation, and to dissipate many snares prepared for us. All of these things being the benefactions of the coming light," which I thought was pretty rad.
No arguments.
Yeah. That's mostly what I pulled out from a little browse through sources and things. There's some other Hamlet quotes and stuff I can put on our Patreon and stuff, and maybe we can find some other rooster lore and red thread and so on.
Yeah, it's also a Chinese astrological sign. I know there's a whole bunch of lore that goes with it there. And there's some interesting Arabic lore of the rooster crawling to the top of the dung heap to crow, and the triumph over the shit of life. Interestingly, rooster spurs are used as part of the medicine for the things that we make, like beaded strands for irosun, for that red can, depending on the Orisha that gives it, but the rooster spur can be loaded, but it's to ward off the bad things, which they're an all red anti-evil eye, eleke basically, but they might have silver dimes which reflect, right? Or rooster spurs which protect, or even cowrie shells which allow hiding but are also money. But cowries can go on anything. Yeah, so okay. I think the opposite side of that, because roosters significantly are heralds of day, despite the fact that we know that they apparently are drunk and will crow anytime. But in this case, if we go to Tochtli, Tochtli is always associated with the moon. And this is because the Mesoamericans, like many indigenous American cultures, both America being both continents, or all three continents, depending on where you are in the world, like China saw a rabbit in the moon. And so the rabbit is associated with the fertility and the fecundity and the growing cycles of the moon. The origin myth on that is simply that when the sun and the moon are created, they have equal shine, and this annoys the gods. So they throw the first thing they can find, which is a rabbit, and throw it at one of them, and it dims one. So the rabbit is responsible for the less shininess of the moon. But therefore, the tonali of Tochtli is has notions of self-sacrifice and service to something greater. The way that the rabbit was given to the moon to
make the rest of life tolerable for everybody else.
Yeah.
Sleep. But the rabbit itself is an interesting sight because there's rabbits are associated with lasciviousness and lechery and just excess because of their heightened earth energy, which is needed sometimes when you're counteracting too little fertility.
Yeah.
But rabbit energy by itself can snowball into excess and need to be corrected and cleansed.
Yeah.
So it's associated with the need to pay attention to all things as having weight, as having consequence, as being sacred. There's no separation of the mundane and the sacred. Every action we do has a consequence, and which might manifest as reward or punishment, to go back to that Welsh triad I love. But it's not, those are not the or even to frame the Welsh triad even better in dealing with Aztec day signs, is that rewards and punishments are not the consequences of our actions, but the properties of them, or that the only thing we are slave to is the outcomes of our decisions, our actions.
Yeah.
So, these things are set in motion by things. They are not the way that karma is talked about sometimes, with like karma's a bitch. Karma is impersonal. Also, karma doesn't happen in this lifetime unless you are putting it through a Christian spin. That karma manifests to benefit you, as opposed to, no, it's just that they will manifest the outcomes of their lifetime in their next incarnation, including how they're born, where they're born, and what they did, which is, this invisible scorekeeping of whatever. Anyway, communing with nature, understanding connections, kind of Fortuna Minor Erosun style of like, what is the context of my decision? What do I need to do? It's a bad day for acting against others. Dochli is under the patronage of Mayahuel. Mayahuel, amazing Deot. She is the patron of the maguey plant and fertility in general. She's protector of the womb post-puberty. So the womb that produces fruit. She is not the protector of prepubescence or post-menopause. She is a protector of the wombs that go through cycles. So once bleeding has happened, which links it to erosin and menstrual blood, which is interesting. So and I'm gonna say it's interesting because the day signs were going in order. So although there's been some really interesting things that have happened aligned, this I like that this is flagging things. She is the mother of the Senson Totochin. The Totochtin are the 400 rabbits. They are the gods of excess and drunkenness. They are what, you invite one rabbit, you're going to get a lot, basically. And so if you have one drink and don't stop, you're going to reap the rewards of your drunkenness. And drunkenness is a very specific quality within Aztec, with Mexica, with, there's a lot of politics there, just like the word fetish. But for convenience here, old people are allowed to get drunk. Young people are not. Young people, it's a waste of time to get drunk. It is not your province. You can drink to enjoy, but you should not drink to inebriation. Whereas old people that have served the state by their good citizenship are allowed to. But the wife of Mayuel is Patecat, who is the god of pulque. Pulque is the, in its aged canned form, smells like semen, and is disgusting. In its fresh form is still slightly semen smelly, but it is the wine version of what, when distilled, becomes tequila or mezcal. So pulque is the drink of the gods. In fact, like one of the rabbits, Ometochli, two rabbit, is all of pulque itself, all of the pulque gods. So, Patecat is also interesting because it shows the balance here. Like there's these colonial impositions that are happening because so much of this lore is being recorded within 100 or 150 years of conquest by Spaniards. They're like, we might as well learn what we destroyed. Specifically, certain priests that are like, we're having a hard time converting them, so we might as well learn about them a little bit more. But Patecat is one of the lords of medicine, so healing and fertility. The father of the 400 rabbits, the divine rabbits, but is so important for healing. And so it shows that the relationship to a little bit of alcohol to socially lubricate, to give us courage, to keep us warm, to allow ourselves to emotionally heal is fine. Excess, where you lose yourself, not so good. Mayuel's also, as the maguey plant, the agave plant, The thorns are used for bloodletting through the tongue, through the penis. We see the obsession with aloe. Many people feel is an ancestral memory of Magé, which looks very similar. Use of aloe on in Curanderismo as that is that kind of nod to what Magé was this healing, this soothing thing. It's also another succulent. So there's like just the stuff that's in the leaves. How they make pulque is that you cut off all the leaves of the plant and you're left with what's called the piña, like a pineapple. It is, the size of a football or up to, the size of a 5-gallon bucket on a 16-year-old plant. And you roast it and you push it down and get its juice out and either ferment it or ferment and distill it. Mayawel is interesting as a deity because she was stolen from her grandmother, and her grandmother is one of the Tsitsimime. Mayawel was in heaven as one of the Tsitsimime, the star deities. The Ehecat Quetzalcoatl, who we talked about when we talked about Ehecat, when he's Ehecat, the god of wind and breath and creation, steals her, and they come and they rip her apart. And Ehecat buries her remains, and that's where Magé grows for the first time. She's generally the ruler. There's an interesting side here because not all of the rulerships are as logical as this, I suppose. She rules the 8th day, which is Tochli, which is why we're talking about her, and the 8th Trecena, which is grass. But interestingly, her husband rules the day of grass itself. So there's this interesting reciprocity, I suppose, there that's interesting. That's not as always conveniently paired in that way. The 13-day period that is Rabbit is actually the last of the 13-day periods. So this interaction of 13 and 12 makes for really complex math, and it's just sometimes easier to remember when things happen. But the last quote-unquote month or week, because 13 days is neither, but the last Trecena starts with one rabbit. And it's so Rabbit sees out the year and gives birth to the creation cycles of one crocodile, which is the first Trecena. The first day of the year and the first Trecena is the crocodile, which is the first time we talked about. So Rabbit sees out the year. So how do you celebrate what needs to be celebrated as well as move on from what needs to move on? It speaks of balance by its own nature, right? And so the first god, the old god, the ancient ones, the god of fire, the ancient god, the god upon who is the fulcrum that the universe is spinning upon, very Eshu-like, of heaven itself. Both renders the universe, like pulls it apart and pulls it back together through dreaming and waking. This spinning of cycles that happens, the dualities that are there. Rabbit speaks of the instability of that and the pull towards escapism that happens for people when they have to contemplate that, and the pull towards getting drunk on the mysteries of revelation that come from it. So they're good days, again, to focus on anything that pulls you into contextualizing the needs of others.
Yeah.
Bad days to focus solely on yourself, which brings us back to that kind of Fortuna Minor Erosun side that I hadn't considered.
The escapism of solipsism and how to ward against it.
Yeah. So Shia Tekutli is the patron of this time period, but Shia Tekutli is also Ishkosauki and Huehueteotl, the old god, the ancient god of fire, the mother and father of the gods, and is considered male at this point. But he stands in the center of the world, so he is light and darkness, the positive side of everything, the life-giving side of everything that exists, in the negative side of everything, in the death-affirming side of everything. So it's a very interesting day. He's married to a deity. But as far as the Trecena and how things go, you also have the uniqueness that at the end of one rabbit's Trecena, you have 13 flower. And 13 flower is the grandmother figure, the first woman, because the first woman is the last day of the old year and the first man is the first day of the new year. And together they birth the new year. So in order to move forward, we have to birth it from what was, but we also have to push it forward into past ourselves.
So there's a lot of the creation deities themselves, and the Lord and Lady of Duality are said to kind of incarnate in this. I talked a little about this when we talked about Sipakli, because Sipakli is the name of the first man, Sesipakli. So we'll get to Xochitl when we talk about Xochitl, the flower sign, which is the 20th sign. So we have a few to go through still. But there's echoes of it here, because one rabbit starts that period of instability, celebration, determination, and fertility. But Xietecutli is also the central deity in the new fire ceremony, which is when all the calendars align every 52 years, and the Pleiades goes very central. And this is believed to be the fire drill of creation is being spun in the body, if you believe the Spanish account, in the chest of a sacrifice victim, where a new fire ceremony. So much like the fires being put out in various Celtic places and being rekindled and the fire being passed, we have a similar thing here, that fires are put out and that the world is centrally organized to where priests are chanting over it, so that the Tsitsimime don't come down, destroy us by, killing us because of improper rituals done. And he also, in addition to this Tresena of Tochli, he's the protector of Ach, which is water, which is my day. So we'll get to that when we get to the water day. But Tochli, basically, like the rabbit, which produces all of these offspring and is carefree, quote unquote, also an incredibly communal animal, right? Like nasty sometimes, but like lives in these burrows and has to figure out how to get along with its own kin. Think of Watership Down in so many ways. But
yeah. Huh.
Tochli.
Tochli. Awesome.
Yeah, just because of the nature of things, I think in talking about that opposition that's there in Huehueteotl, in Xietecutli, the mother and father of the gods, the kind of life and death thing that happens with that. Seems like a natural ingress, even though I would probably talk about this before we talked about our dead magician anyway, but the Two of Cups, which seems to be almost universally like there's a lot of difference here, right, between oftentimes between the kind of cartomantic meanings that come from playing card divination versus tarot, but the twos tend to not be quite as difficult, because you're seeing two cups being clinked, right? So love, union, partnership, balance, that type of thing. There's reconciliation even, right?
Right, with the clinking, there's like the cup as container of passion and emotion, but like emotional connection, like even talking about the two on at least on the Rider Waite Smith, of like reaching to each other, of pledging to one another, is what Waite says.
Yeah. And then and giving birth to that caduceus with the lion angel, right? Alchemical marriage, the red lion being one of the ways to get to the philosopher's stone, and the kind of twin energy, the sexual energies uniting here in a very specific male and female. I like that this is used as a marker of third degree Wicca for some people, specifically the Great Rite as well, because I know a group that is both Alexandrian and Gardnerian that their logo involves this card, because in the Gardnerian Great Rite, the female, the high priestess, holds the chalice, and the male holds the athame, athame, if you're in Boston. Take a whammy from my athame. Was a common bumper sticker that I didn't get until I heard someone pronounce it that way. But in the Alexandrian, the male holds the chalice and the female holds the... So it switches, so both are represented here. But is there anything specific? I'll go into Spanish cards in a second, but a lot of the meaning overlaps. Is there
really? That's cool. Yeah, I think it's interesting, at least with the Rider Waite Smith, that it mirrors the Lovers in some sense, like in terms of like the two. But whereas the Lovers comes from an older sense of, I think we talked about this on that episode, about like older forms that are about choosing between a romantic life of adventure or safe domesticity, and the security, but also potential boredom versus the exciting but potentially very dangerous and ruinous. In contrast, the Two of Cups is about like the decision has been made. And like, yeah, as Waite says, the youth and maiden are pledging to one another. Like that he says, some curious emblematical meanings are attached to it, but they do not concern us in this place. So
Pay
he
no
gives,
attention to the man behind the curtain.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, he gives the divinatory meanings of love, passion, friendship, affinity, union, concord, sympathy, the interrelation of the sexes. And then does a typical weightism and is like, as a suggestion apart from all offices of divination, that desire which is not in nature, but by which nature is sanctified. Which, okay. The interesting, just looking at the overview of divinatory meanings from Madame Le Marchand says it's a marriage or fidelity in wedlock specifically. McGregor Mathers brings in reading reversals, and so upright, it's love, attachment, friendship, sincerity, and affection. And interestingly reversed, it's not difficulty with those things, it's the opposite of those things. Cross desires, obstacles, opposition, hindrance. And that's what Papus runs with, is opposition, unimportant obstacles raised by one of the lovers. And so there is still some like lovers quarrel type stuff going on in the twos. But yeah, overall, this sense of the power of emotional connection and meaningful relationships seems to be present a lot of the time. Sometimes the caduceus, which after all is, not just as deep as his healing, but is supposed to have emerged from two snakes, fucking, is also talked about as about healing and balance and integration of opposites. And sometimes the cards have, the figures have wings. So we have the spiritual aspect of union and transcendence through connection, and those kinds of things. The pairing of wings, like the pairing of scissor blades, perhaps. Yeah, I'm curious to hear how Spanish cartomancy does and doesn't kind of affirm those things.
Yeah, I mean, the cups, just to review, is still it's water, it's the table, it's the hearth, it's the home, it's religion and clergy, it's as far as a social class, it's love and high emotions, creativity, fertility, legacy, nostalgia, that type of thing. But the Two of Cups is love, fertility, creativity, children. Like, just, it's the multiplication of these things.
Yeah.
And it plays, and reversed, it generally is desire. So love and desire are both being here, right? There's one cup, you want to make it two. It is will, passion, friendship, amistad, accord, all of those things here. So it's, again, I think it's really difficult to not see the two people. Ironically, in most of the two people holding like cups together, in most of the naipes and Baraja Española, you'll see one cup above the other, like superimposed. So it doesn't have the side-by-side nature, which some people take to mean is like, if in the right context, what you're talking about, it can be an unbalanced love, but it has to have other flags there. Because a lot of times, yes, there's meaning put to the way the cards are drawn, but these are not as universal because this is dependent upon the maker. And if you only have one set of cards where you grew up, like, you're going to apply a lot of meanings to it. Generally, the twos are opposers, so this is called the opposer of water. But that can also be both sides of the reflection, love, Narcissus, and the kind of projection across the reflecting divide. There's also the extreme mirroring here of the chalice and the ciborium. Ciborium, I guess, ciborium, the communion cup for wine, and the communion cup that has a lid that's for the wafers once they're consecrated. So the pairing there provides union. It provides the highest form of love, like that. This is the love of sacrifice of God. And so this is why this is by virtue of this, it's not just the blood of Christ outpoured into the communion chalice. This is also here, and the Two of Cups, the bread comes in, the complete meal, the complete sitting at the altar or the table is now possible. So it is priest, but it also represents
At first, probably the patriarch of the family being the priest of the family, but in Latin America, it heavily extends to who are the reigning couple of the house,
Ah,
the Lord and Lady of the house. So if grandma's there, she might be religious authority, but she's going to come up more in the ace than she does in the two, and the two can be this position of authority. You might see the Two of Cups be related to Scholastica and Benedict, as far as twin saints that are both,
ah,
so a male and a female, Saint or Clare and Saint Francis, in these lores that are there, but also just the notion, or Saint John and Saint Mary Magdalene,
mm,
as the two beloveds, in that way, or Saint John and just Mary, as the flanking of the cross. So the cup, the Ace of Cups, is the blood outpouring from the cross, falling into the chalice, chinemastica style almost, of
mm.
either side by John, and who is the is John the bread? I can't remember. One is the bread and one is the wine. But I can now justify both in my head because that's how my brain works. But I believe that Mary is usually given over to be the waters of creation.
Mm,
The
mhm.
as a human there, as the female, that the womb is the waters of creation. The Holy Spirit, because the Holy Spirit overshadows the waters,
Yeah.
ruach, and that in the New Testament, the Holy Spirit overshadows Mary the way that it overshadows the Ark of the Covenant. So
Mm,
Mary is the new Ark, and Jesus is the new covenant.
mm,
And so there's this thing there, and then John is the bread because he shared in the meal of communion with Jesus.
mm.
So there's just this parallel here between all of these things going on. And it would make sense too that if Mary Magdalene is the one for the chalice in this card, that then, as far as a progenitrix of something else going on, the wombs of fertility that are then given over to spiritual wisdom,
Yeah.
and the reflection in the surface of the wine. So it's still very much there: love, fertility, creativity, children, desire, will, passion, friendship. Like I've memorized it a few times. But it doesn't. I mean, desire and love are not too different.
Right.
The main thing is just reversed. There's an implication that there is a desire for love, a desire for fertility, a desire for children,
Mm,
or at least friendship. And
mm.
friendship, it can also fall under suspicion, and that's something to see if any of the others are around sevens or ones, or whatever you see the destabilizing forces are within the divination.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm. So yeah, thinking about connection, not just in terms of what the card says, but how the card connects up in
Yeah,
the
Spanish cartomancy for the most part, although things can be trophied out, like this is the victory, like you look for that ace of coins to finish the reading. This is success. We have found what you're looking for. If that's the top card, thank you very much for the money, but you don't need a reading. Um, uh, how do you stabilize that? Then you can get into prescriptive of how do you maintain your blessing, and that's a different reading.
Right,
But the first reading is we're in a good place. If the coin is at the very end, then we gotta talk.
right.
But here, there's also a sign, I suppose, of, I guess, just that the cups here in this place are not as stable as the coins, and that there is something to be examined always deeper here. That the context of cards, uh, is always dependent upon the company it keeps. When you do a line of 3 or a grid of 9 or a cross or any of the number of layouts that are proposed, but doing a line of 5 or 7, 7 is very common. The way I was taught is you're looking for things in context, because love by itself, love what? Love lost, love won? Like what are
Mm,
we talking about? It's a positive card usually when it's upright. But fertility, what if someone's trying to attack your fertility, and whatever's speaking through the cards is like, no, your love is in jeopardy, but you're not throwing the damn second card.
right, right,
So
right.
this isn't a broad concept of love. We want recommendations. We want proscriptions and prescriptions in order to secure blessing and
Yeah.
to erase
What
ailment.
right. What's the verb here? Yeah.
We want to Anthony these cards up. We want to protect
Mm,
against the loss of our love, our we want to find lost things which might be blessings, and we want to prevent against the loss of things as well.
yeah. Yeah.
So both sides of Antony. The baby gets switched over from the left to the right hand. Um, but yeah,
Yeah.
so something there. Um,
Mhm.
I think there's something interesting there too. I'm trying to make a leap here of amistad, of friendship, of notoriety, perhaps, of our magician for the day. Um, I debated whether or not like this is going to be interesting enough for people, but I do think that Jubiaba is quite an interesting figure. Um,
Mm.
Jubiaba is Macumba priest, a Candomblé priest. Was he truly Candomblé? Like, who knows? It's hard to know for sure. What we would again, the labeling game happens and people argue about it. But Jubiaba is also known because of his initiating Josina da Gomea, who is as equally well known, if not more, in certain circles. They go back and forth. But Jubiaba was so well known that he had a novel named for him, a fictitious account where there is a high priest of Candomblé in the novel that is named for the caboclo that Tata Jubiaba mounts. As far as who he was, Severiano Manuel de Abreu, or Jubiaba, is born April 20th, and 1886, and passes October 28th, 1937. So he's credited as being a Babalorisha of Candomblé. Some people would say that it wasn't really Candomblé, that it was what's called Mesa Branca, white table, but that doesn't mean the same thing as like white table spiritism from Cuba.
Yeah.
It implies, we'll get into that controversy, but it implies that it was not held at equal value to the other Candomblés. That's really what I'm talking about. Was it Candomblé? Sure. Was it Candomblé to everybody else? Maybe not.
Mm.
There, there is he himself was initiated by a man who was said to be by the spiritual descendants, Tata Miguel Arcangel, the Father Michael the Archangel, who came directly from Congo. What he was practicing was a form of low spiritism where they incorporated spirits as well as deities, and that was what pissed people off. So the kind of high versus low magic argument in Brazil is, do you incorporate our African deities or do you mix it with the dead people of the streets and Indians and old slaves that are here? Which became eventually Umbandized into the codification of Umbanda into different pretos velhos, Quimbanda, Ciganas, all these other things started, the Eres, all these lines got organized through Umbanda.
Yeah.
Umbanda did a lot of beautiful things. They're like, we can all coexist. However, the wars of the candomblés, there is specifically something called Candomblé da Caboclo, Candomblé de Caboclo, excuse me. The Candomblé of the Caboclos is a Candomblé that, in addition to worshiping orishas, voduns, or inquisis, worships the spirits of, worships, quote unquote, interacts with, mounts the spirits called caboclos, which are the indigenous spirits, or entidades, cachizos, gentileiros, so boyaderos, caboclos, pretos velhos, Eshus, and pombagiras. So it is not considered a separate nation because Candomblé is usually organized across to nations. So you have Jeji, which is Fombe, you have Jeji Nago, which is a little bit more on the border where it has Orisha and Fodun kind of moving back and forth. You have Ketu, which can also be Jeji Nago. You have Ifon. These are all Nago nations, so this is all Yoruba influence. You also have Congo Angola, Bantu, which are all of the Congolese versions and have similar expressions. So Candomblé Caboclo was kind of a pejorative at first, of like, oh, you're doing that shit where you mix shit. And that's what pissed people off. There's a quote, where is, I know it's here. I have notes. It happens. Well, here's one note specifically, just a description from the novel Jubiaba by Jorge Amado. Antonio Baldino didn't know what to expect from Jubiaba. Talking about this, he respected him, but with a different respect than he had for Father Silvino, his aunt Luisa, Lorenzo from the and Zé Camarão, and even the legendary figures of Lampião and Edipolo. Jubiaba would walk huddled through the alleys of the hill. The men would listen to him with respect. He would receive greetings from everyone, and luxury cars would stop at his door from time to time. One day, a boy told Baldino that Jubiaba turned into a werewolf. Another said that he had the devil trapped in a bottle. On certain nights, strange sounds of strange music would come from Jubiaba's house. Antonio Baldino would move around on his mat. He would become restless. It seemed that the music was calling him. It was a mystery. Jubiaba was a novel that was written and it sensationalized, of course, this caboclo and this person known as Jubiaba, that it was a support for labor issues and class issues that were being illustrated through the novel. There was kind of even he's mentioned as a character in the novel, right? So he's said to be vain and have strong political influence, which many leaders of temples did because they had politicians and people in the law coming to them for protection, for advancement, for all the things that magicians are known for. The political connections with members and advisors of the government, such as Braga, Martinelli Braga, who was just a cabinet officer, are highlighted in certain interviews, including by Jubiaba. They gave him prestige, they enabled the exchange of favors, they attracted benefits for the community, and they helped to protect his Tejero from police violence. So he was paying people off through being a central member of things. They published this, the Estado de Bahia published an interview because of the novel that was in a world full of mysteries of spirits and saints, accompanied by the two subtitles. The first one was, beginning a long report on spiritism and candomblés, the state of Bahia saw and heard the famous Jubiaba, hero of Jorge Amado's last novel, which it was a fictionalized account of Jubiaba, but that conflation was there, right? And then the second subtitle, from unbeliever to healing medium, Cruz de Cosme and its stronghold, even among the spirits there are sensitives and vanities, father of 22 living children, political influence. So it was intrigue. It was in the papers. And it started this exchange in the papers where they would write letters to each other, the author of the novel and Jubiaba. And it wasn't always well written. It was there was kind of intrigue around it all. But what we do know is that what I want to point out, I have to find my notes real quick on this, is that what made people crazy is that, here it is. Okay, here we go. Oh, so to mention him is also important to mention Josinho. And for me, for my Quimbanda lineage specifically, Josinho da Gomea is the source of Quimbanda de Angola. So he's 4 or 5 people up above me in my initiations. And Jubiaba was the initiator of Josinho originally. So Josinho is born in March in 1914 in a town in Bahia. His family's Catholic. He becomes an altar boy, but he seems destined, he's called to Afro-Brazilian religious traditions. In the small town where he was born, which was about 150 kilometers from the capital, from Salvador, at 10, he already was like sneaking out. And doing shit, which marks him as a good son of Yansa, of Mapamba. So he leaves at the age of 17 and heads to Salvador, where he did everything to survive. He was a known drag artist and openly gay. If not by this time, but definitely by the time he became a famous priest. In the warehouse where he worked, he met a woman who helped him a lot, and he considered her his godmother. It was her who took him to Manuel de Abreu, to Jubiaba. And so after making the saint at age 18, making the saint, he immediately went into, he absorbed everything. He was living there basically, and he opened a house of Candomblé da Caboclo in Angola, worshiping the Inquisi, as well as Encantados and spirits of Amerindians. So with the death of Jubiaba, and people not recognizing his validity because no one questioned Jubiaba when he was alive, Josinho was made again in Gantua with my Menina from the Ketu Nation. So because of that, that began the controversy that would follow him, of the mixing of the two nations, of this very Congo and very Yoruba way of approaching of things. And part of all that is that he incorporated caboclos as well as Nkisi and Orisha in his temple. And there's the researcher was Ruth Landes, I think, in A City of Women, is the Cidade das Mulheres. Caboclos are not orishas, are not Nkisi, but enchanted spirits originating from the indigenous religions with no connection to Africa, unquote. The so-called candomblés of Caboclo were despised by the people of Quetu under the allegation that it was necessary to preserve the purity of their African roots. But the association and permanence of the Caboclos in the cults of Angola was not due to the lack of African purity. The Bantu people also have their traditions, the strongest of which in their religiosity is the cult of the ancestors. It was to preserve the ancestry of the owners of the land they were on, the Indians, that these people incorporated caboclos into their cults, meaning you can't practice a cult of ancestry and ignore the land that you are on. So that it created a war between Yoruba purists and the Congo, who said, we're not in Africa. We are here. We have to acknowledge the spirits of here. If there are spirits of people that have died in the street outside my Tahiro, and I don't leave offerings for that, what are you doing? It doesn't make sense. All of these things have to incorporate the land you're on. And things go all over the place, but this pejorative nature of idols, right, is here in, you're doing candomblé caboclo. It's not real candomblé. Because you incorporate everything. So it was like an overly religious Umbanda. It was a competitor for early Umbanda, but it was still candomblé. It still followed all of the orthodox rituals of candomblé Angola and candomblé Quetu, because he was doing both. And that pissed people off because he mounted Matamba, Gongobila, Yansa, and Oshosi. He mounted the expressions of both his Orisha, his primary and secondary Orishas, in both systems. And in addition to that, now when you look at videos and pictures, you see men when they're mounted, everybody's dressed in large crinolines and dresses. He was the first, his Matamba or Yansa, I'm not sure which one, demanded to be dressed as a woman when she came down. And because he was gay and a drag, people said, oh, he just wants to wear a dress. Maybe he did. But he started a trend that people criticized him for in his lifetime. And one of his goddaughters, when he passed, people were doing all these articles. He's like, none of you would have come for him in his day because his caboclo or his Yansa or his Oshosi would have come down and put you to filth. Like, so shut your mouth now. If you couldn't talk about him when he was alive, you don't get to talk about him now. So, in fact, the side of it is that even Landes is kind of nasty about it. Like, there's a nice young father, Angola, Candomblé Angola father called Joao, who knows nothing, almost nothing, and who no one takes seriously, not even his godchildren. But he's an excellent dancer and has charisma. So everyone knows that he's a homosexual because he has his long, stiff hair that flows out, which is blasphemous, basically being like, how can you let this happen where Orisha is dwelling? People wanted things to be pure and there was a certain amount of segregation between the different nasois, but that also is bullshit because they were all talking to each other and learning from each other. The whole system of hierarchy and physical structure of the candomblés, all Jeji, Nago, and Angola all talked to each other and were moving through each other. There was a lot of artificial war that was done through cult of personality and business competition. So I think why Jubiabai is interesting is because Jubiabai is so mythic, right? For years, it was even hard to find out what his real name was. But part of it, there's also these articles that you'll read online in Portuguese of the importance of this chair, the a cadeira. So we talk about the cathedra, right? That we talked about with like the throne of Saint Peter, the chair of Saint Peter.
Yeah.
So in a candomblé terreiro, the Pai de Santos sits in a throne, and it's just a fancy chair. That's his right. It's his terreiro. He's the godfather of all those people present, and like people in rank sit next to him, visiting guests sit next to him, blah blah blah. So he's watching the ritual. He's trained people. He's looking at everything happening, surveying his terreiro. So what happened was that the police raided Jubiabá, and I believe in October of 1920, in his house, the police raided the terreiro and took key objects, including asentamientos of Orisha, of Nkisi, Nkisi, because it's Jubiabá, and including his chair, his symbolic chair that says his name on it, and they kept it. So they took these items as if they were trophies, and some of them were sold, some of them were displayed, some of them were, oh, come watch and look at these crazy African religion people doing their shit. Because this is the 20s, so this is the start of we have to import whiteness into Brazil in order to make us be on par with a world power. We have to use blackness. Brazil is the largest black country. It's just huge. And so there's this 95 years passes, I believe, so 2005 or 2005. They decide
the Department of Public Security and the president of Eduardo Moraes de Castro decides that there should be, along with Roberto Santos, who's the governor, signs a decree that exempts Afro-Brazilian religious entities from mandatory registration with the Department of Public Security. So, meaning they made everybody register. You had to have a certain percentage of Yoruba-ness sometimes, or and as far as becoming legal taxed entities and or not taxed entities or all these things, that's always a constant debate. But religion was starting to be protected more and more. So religion was something you couldn't fuck with, but they decided to not make people register. And as part of the symbolic act of this, they decided to give back the chair of Jubiaba to his spiritual descendants. So it's housed at Mocambo, which is founded in the 90s, I think. And Tata Anselmo and Tata Kamukenji. So this temple, Onzonguzu Zankisi Danalula Temple, the house of the spiritual force of Dandalunda and Tempo, is the remnants of the Terreiro San Jorge Filho da Gumea, which was the one that was the Congo version of, or the Angola descendant of Josinho, who was the spiritual son of Jubiaba. So long story short, they gave the chair back. I'll put a picture of it in the Patreon, and it's an interesting symbolic status of these police raids that happened, and the purposeful keeping of power objects as a thing of especially when it was no one cared as much because it's Canon de Caboclo. They didn't do this to the big houses. They did this to Jubiaba. So there's something there of trying to put people in their place that are combining things that are, especially the Congo got the bad end of the deal. As far as the novel by Jorge Amado, Camus calls it a magnificent and a haunting book. The novel, here's the plot summary. The novel tells the story of the friendship between Baldinho and the Candomblé priest Jubiaba. After the death of his insane aunt when he was a boy, Baldinho was sent to work in a rich white family. He's black. However, he has to escape when he is unjustly accused of violence towards Linda Nalva, the beautiful daughter of his caretakers. Baldinho thenceforth spends the rest of his youth in freedom as a member of a gang of street kids, which anticipates Amado his later novel, Captains of the Sands. Subsequently, he becomes a successful boxer, but depressed after his first defeat, he leaves Salvador and starts to work on a tobacco plantation, only to be forced to flee again when he almost murders a fellow worker. On his return to Salvador, he meets Linda Nava, who, following the bankruptcy of his father, is now a prostitute. On her deathbed, she entrusts her son to him. Baldinho was then employed as a port worker. His involvement in a general strike causes conflict with his old friend Jubiaba, who he considers insufficiently supportive of the strike. So it's looking at Afro-Brazilian culture, inside and outside of Candomblé and Macumba. And it has a lot of this understanding of political consciousness amongst the working class. So the tension tends to be diluted or diffused by the kind of nostalgia for the simple life of the poor in the book. But it was published first in 1935, published in English in 1989. They've made movies, radio plays from it. 1986 movie by that title, Jubiaba. There's comic books, versions of it. So I like that it is someone who, if it weren't for modern times, we might not know who the real Jubiaba is.
Yeah.
As far as tensions of, it ties into the idols better than I thought it would. Of our stuff is sacred, you're fucking shit up. The constant magical battles that happen anywhere, apparently. What you're doing is not good enough, and what I'm doing is the only actual way, which is the ultimate in colonial mentality to me, that this, Brazil is usually so good at you don't like what I do, go across the street. There's a whole other temple there. We don't have to be enemies. You don't need the whole world. You need the right number of people to work with. You don't need all the friends in the world. You need your friends. So, this idea of nossa magia that we've talked about before and kind of herald, it's important. Focus on your shit. Stop worrying about the shit.
Yeah.
And enemies, wish them happiness far away from you, because when people are happy, they aren't sitting here thinking about how to fuck with you. If people are perpetual victims, let them go be victims somewhere else. You're always going to be wrong in their eyes.
Yeah.
So accountability and, what is the house culture? What are those things? This is something to model off of that, But these early institutions of Candomblé Caboclo, Mesa Branca, Umbanda, Macumba in general, there's so much politicking behind it. It's
Mm.
insane. And as the religions gain traction within legal protection, without legal protection, registration, no registration, how much they have to be acceptable to the middle class and to a larger thing, how much is keeping up with the Kardashians type of thing, in order to have the newest trends. Is your, Kimbanda in its ancestral form doesn't use the word Eshu Pombagira, and yet it's going to by the 70s because people are just like, but don't you have Eshu Pombagira? Like, oh yeah, but we don't call them that. Like, well, then you don't have them. And you're like, but we do. We actually version. And people go, no, 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 you have to call them Eshu Pombagira. Okay, sure. So you see Macumba Carioca keep on developing in reaction to everything going else. Got, Rio de Janeiro is not Bahia, but this affects because people went down to Rio because Candomblé Caboclo was easier to get away with in Rio de Janeiro because people said, fucking do whatever you want.
Yeah.
Bahia was very orthodox, and there was a war between ideologies and things going on. So
Mm. Yeah, fascinating. Huh. Yeah. The crossroads of things, the arguments you survive, the guarding of your fire. Huh. Huh.
and specifically, right, that a dead magician, yes, absolutely someone involved in Macumba and the development of Macumba and notorious for effective Macumba. Like
Mm.
people were scared of him, not only from the book, because that means somebody noticed him, but just his main spiritual successor is also well known and people can make fun of him and talk about it, but that notoriety, it brings up the Spanish proverb like fame and infamy are both fame.
Mm.
And it's hard, but it's interesting to think of all these things that are going on with Juliaba and the notion that what he was doing was dark and half that is just racism of the
Yeah.
time period. What he's actually doing, I'll never know. I'm hoping his spiritual descendants do, but we are some of his spiritual descendants.
Right.
So it's an interesting side of it of what is the mythic origin of any tradition? How does that the recent documentation things Candomblé Caboclo, is it valid? Is it not? It's not talked about on the same level as the other candomblés, and yet I understand full-heartedly. Maybe that's because the Kimandero in me is like, how can you practice what you do if you're not acknowledging the land you're on?
Yeah.
We,
Yeah. Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
not just a colonizing force. We're not just recreating what is somewhere else. I'm here right now in this time period,
Yeah.
in this location. So I think there's lots of things there.
Again, what is the more traditional or practice of right relation of crystallizing something from somewhere else once you've been displaced or moved or in diaspora, or doing what's done there here in a way that responds to what's here? What's the right relation here? What's like you said, like having good relation with the dead folks who are here, the respect for those that came before. Yeah, no, that's mm, fascinating and important.
On all of that, um, finding what's lost.
On all of that, yeah, finding what's lost.
My point. Um,
Finding connections in active watchfulness.
Scratching
Uh,
that soil until you find either food or poison and deal with it appropriately.
yeah.
Uh,
Um,
Read book on little baby Jesus.
the crowing and also the minding of your tongue.
Absolutely, yeah. Or just the biting and the taking of it out. A rooster is like a dog, except when it's not. Uh, the Anthony is second to God, uh,
Mm.
and possession makes Catholics upset, except when they own everything. Uh, mm,
Escaping brushes with danger and staying true to what returns us to ourselves and our communities.
yes, the allowing warning to be a joyous advance of danger as opposed to the danger itself.
Mm,
The
mm,
to be forewarned is to be forearmed,
mm,
which
mhm,
is so the dose makes the cure, and
mm.
don't apply too much belladonna juice.
Right. Cool. What's too heated, but don't overcool to sleep madness or death. Heat up our courage, but not to the point of being a bloody idiot.
Don't make an idol of something that is not grounded in reality.
Mm,
Oh, understand the limitations of your idols.
Yeah.
perhaps, uh,
Ah. Yeah.
or of a store-bought Yangi.
Yeah, or the little mysteries that can move mountains. Yeah. Yeah. The
The Little Men of the Mountains. Oh, that was
the
good.
little men of the mountains, yeah.
Uh,
The crossroads of creativity and the creativity of crossroads.
that the goddess of the agave plant is married to the god of healing, and both make lots of rabbit babies
Mm.
that teach us to live in community and find balance or suffer the repercussions. Same community that nourishes us will tear us down if we are out of bounds, which
Yeah.
reminds me of that Congolese proverb. Community is like honey. It is oh so sweet and oh so sticky. But also
Yeah.
the preservation of relationships because of that, to understand that no one single individual ambition or desire can be taken out of context if it wishes to be sustainable.
Mm.
So the Two of Cups as love and desire, as partnership and friendship, as teacher and student, perhaps, of Jubiaba and Longira, who is
Mm.
Josinho's initiatory name,
Mm.
of the fictional priest and the real priest, the seat of authority that gets taken away, but his authority is not actually gone.
Mm.
The return of the seat of authority to the spiritual descendants, but that does not return Jubiaba to you.
Mm.
Um, yeah, Eshu is the devil, except when in the hands of our enemies, and then you all can fuck off. So, yeah, happy feast of Saint Anthony.
Happy Feast of St. Anthony, everyone. Uh, Thank you as always, Jesse.
Thank you, Al. I guess our obligatory tags, please find us on radiofreegolgotha.com. We try to keep our events updated there. We also have our personal sites, alexandercummins.com and jessehathawaydiaz.com. Some conferences coming up,
Mhm.
or perhaps in the distant past by the time you hear this, in true Eshu form. And we have our Patreon, Radio Free Golgotha, second of its name, or second of its mention. If you would like to deep dive with us and go on tangents and scavenger hunts and red threads through the labyrinth of our rabbit holes. That sounds dirty. And additionally, folk necromancy on the Fachabuki, as a Facebook forum to look at folk necromancy, and perhaps more things coming, and another Speakeasy of the Dead soon. So feel
Yeah.
free to subscribe to our newsletter on the Radio Free Golgotha site, and feel free to yell at us and praise us and tell us book recommendations, music recommendations, or any recipes of interest, both magical and or foods. I eat everything for the most part, but Al is still a vegetarian.
For the most part.
For the most part. He eats the souls of his enemies just fine.
So tasty.
So tasty, a little tough on the teeth, but
It's the salt that brings the taste, you know.
mhm, mhm. It's the infamy that brings the fame. So, and with that, dear listener, I bid you a happy, for me, Pleiades rising, a happy feast of San Antonio, a happy day of Eshu, because this entity in its full spectrum, from ancestral messenger to God force to the fulcrum of the universe, will be celebrated this day by
Mm.
billions of people. And that is a beautiful mystery all in of itself.
Mhm. Yeah. Happy Anthony, everyone.
Bye bye.